Good evening. Welcome to this meeting of Manitou Springs City Council. This is a regular council meeting for March the 21st, 2023. We'll start off with the Pledge of Allegiance. So if you all join me. Would the city clerk please call the roll?
City Council members Judith Chandler. Present. John Shada.
Here.
Julie Wolfe. Here. Natalie Johnson.
Here.
Michelle Weatherholt.
She is excused.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Nancy Fortune.
Present.
And Mayor John Graham.
Present.
Thank you.
And to amplify on Councilor Weatherholt's excuse, she's recovering from a broken hip. So we wish her well. And my understanding is she's not going to try and join us by phone or Zoom. Is that correct?
That's what I understand as well.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay, council, you've had a chance to look over the agenda. I apologize for its being so involved tonight, but it's springtime and pretty soon summer will be upon us. So I would ask for a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll move to approve the agenda as presented. Second.
Motion is second. Okay, let's go ahead and vote.
Six to zero in favor.
Okay, great. We can get on with business. Next item is public comment on non-agenda items. So this is the portion of the meeting when anyone in the public is welcome to speak to a non-agenda item. And we would ask that you limit your comments to 3 minutes. I believe we have a gentleman who wanted to speak, at least one, so this would be the time. Sir, if you'd come forward. Okay, on the microphone there, you'll see the button in the center. You need to press that. A green light will come on. Try and get, be about 3 inches from the microphone. So if you could start off with your name and address, and again, 3 minutes for your comments, if you would, please.
Sure. Tom Wilson, and 30-year resident. I live at 727 Duclos Avenue. And I've lived here, like I said, for 30 years. My comment is regarding short-term rentals. We've got a fairly large house, certainly large for Manitou, and our kids, we raised them all here and sent them out. And now we have a large house, and we thought it would be a good idea to move and to do short-term rentals, and found out that we cannot. And so that's really what I'm addressing. I made a list of benefits to the city for short-term rentals. And I'm not going to go over those. I think, we probably have some of those. I also tried to figure out how it would benefit me as a homeowner and a resident of Manitou, how it would benefit me not to be able to do that. And I think it would be something that would be, the rule is 500 feet. And I'm not telling you so you know, I'm sure you already know this. And I think from 500 feet, anyone right off of Manitou Ave, about a fifth of Manitou will be within 500 feet. I mean, it's a pretty tightly packed town, so it's pretty difficult to find an opportunity for the existing bed and breakfast or short-term rentals to close down to enable us to be able to do that. And I would like to be able to run really the purpose is, I'd love for other people. I have a 140-year-old home, and a lot of people in Manitou do. I'd like tourists who want to come. It's, 5 bedrooms. I'd like them to have a place where they could come and enjoy the town and spend their money in our town, and for the city to get taxes and for me to make some money. And so that's really what I would like, the freedom to be able to do that with my home, which I recently paid off. That's why I was kind of excited about buying another house and then making this a great getaway for people to come and enjoy Manitou as well.
Thank you for your comments.
Did I make it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah,
time?
you did quite nicely. You're under 2 minutes.
Okay.
Go ahead.
One other question. Do I have to stay for the rest?
Yeah, and you get pizza halfway through the meeting for us. So, no, you
have to stay.
You're welcome to leave if you'd like. You're welcome to stay. Okay. All right. Thank you. Yeah. We have any more offers of pizza? I mean, anyone else want to speak? Judy, did we have? We do have someone. Okay.
Hello, Mark Ramey, 115 Canyon Ave. I'm again speaking on behalf of Manitou Lofts and Shops as a member of the board in regards to the proposed use of Shoshone Park as an official dedicated street performer location. The facts at the forefront of this issue were left unaddressed by this council the last time this was brought up. On September 29th, 2003, Chuck England gave the land for Shoshone Park as an in-kind donation during the redevelopment approval of downtown Manitou. His liaison was Kitty Clements, a paid consultant in charge of the downtown redevelopment. There was a single condition attached to this donation that the land would not be used in a way that disrupts residents. Due to the location and layout of the park, an unreasonable use of the land would inflict an intolerable burden on the residences attached to the park. None of the other proposed locations are immediately adjacent to a residence. None of them are within inches of a bedroom and home office. There is another proposed location near these residences. We aren't objecting to that location because it's a categorically different situation and that use is reasonable. This situation was compared to a hypothetical of someone complaining about the sound of traffic coming from a road near their home. The comparison would be only valid if you had donated that land near your home under the condition that it not be used as a road. If the road was built inches from your bedroom and office, the comparison would hold water. But our society doesn't organize itself that way because that would be an unreasonable thing to do. Also, the existence of traffic does not inherently violate the noise ordinance, whereas the proposed location does. It was said that we're newcomers trying to change the town. This is entirely false, and it generated undue animosity towards us within the community. We had no problem with how things were. We are aware that there is a community directive to make decisions on the proposed performer locations. Residents are being conspicuously left out of that process.
Excuse me, Ramey. We are going to be discussing the so-called buskers ordinance later tonight. And we won't be taking public comment during that time because it's be first reading. So we will have that in 2 weeks. I think you raised an interesting point about this agreement that the developer had. So I'm going to let you finish, but we're kind of in a marginal area. So if you'll go ahead and continue, but yeah, be
Okay.
brief. Thank you.
I was just finishing up. Residents are being ostracized. The specific person who donated the land is being disrespected and ignored. The agreement over his donation is being broken and the unreasonable, untenable nature of this proposed location is being disregarded. Why? The agreement over the land use should be honored. The location should be removed or the proposal altered in an acceptable, reasonable way. The proposal breaks a pre-existing agreement and is manifestly unreasonable burden on residents. We encourage you to visit Shoshone Park and observe the situation of this proposed location as it is, and to acknowledge the stipulation of the land donation. Thank you.
Thank you. We have anyone else who'd like to speak to a non-agenda item? Okay, if not, let's push on. So next item is the consent calendar. We have 5 items on tonight's consent calendar. First is approval of the March 7th, 2023 regular meeting minutes. Second is presentation of warrants. That's the city's checkbook. Third, approval of the City Hall remodel contract. Fourth, approval of the city's submission of an EIAF grant to the Department of Local Affairs for the Mesa Water Tank. And fifth, approval of the city's submission to an EIAF grant to the Department of Local Affairs for a major update to Plan Manitou. So if there's any item that a council member would like to take off and discuss separately, we can do that. If not, I would ask for a motion to accept and approve the consent calendar.
Move to approve consent calendar is presented.
And is that seconded by
Second.
Councilor Johnson? Okay, excuse me, we don't need discussion. Let's vote.
Six to zero in favor.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, and I guess I'm up next with a brief presentation on the Pikes Peak Area Council of Governments and Pikes Peak Rural Transportation Authorities updates. This is based on meetings that I attended last week. And Judy, can we bring those slides up? We have kind of a long meeting night, so I don't want to belabor this, but I think there's several things came up that I think it's useful for our council and our public to know. One of the main emphases of the meeting at PPACG was an update of a 4-year plan for the Pikes Peak Area Agency on Aging. And they provide a number of services that probably we as a community in Manitou are not taking advantage of. They have, for instance, information assistance, family caregiver support. Go to the next slide. They provide counseling. Again, these are for seniors. In some cases, they also do this for disabled individuals, so they would not have to be of age to be a senior. They do some case management. There's homemaker and personal care. And this really gets to be a lot more involved than I had realized. So this was an eye opener for me. Reassurance, they'll call out and contact people to make sure they're conscious, they're doing okay. This is for people who are at risk and older people. And then they have the education. They offer classes on things like Medicare, Social Security, retirement planning. So those are some things that are available. Their office is only at 7 South Chestnut, so it's fairly easy to get to. And I think as council members, we often encounter people in the community who are older. We know from our recent demographics that we have an aging population. A lot of people are single or couples. So if you know of people who could probably use a little help, this would be a good place to turn them to. And then last slide, if you would, please. Okay, I'm sorry. They have some specialized transportation needs and community. They've done a community assessment survey for older adults, which if you'd like to get that in detail, I can provide it. It's something like 60 pages long. I know this agenda item was about 320 pages of material, so it was a bit of a rodeo. And then Judy, if we go to the next slide. Okay, we've got volunteer positions open. These are for Manitou Springs residents. And typically these are groups that are staffed by volunteers from all the regional jurisdictions. So Colorado Springs, Manitou, Green Mountain Falls, Callahan, and so forth. So we've got 5 openings there. If you know of anyone that you think might be interested in that, and this would apply to anyone in the audience too, let us know. We'll go ahead and see if that person would actually be interested in serving. It's a worthwhile group. There are a lot of regional problems that this group tries to focus on. And then the Pikes Peak Regional Transportation Authority, it was pretty routine, so I won't go into that unless anyone is excited to hear about how CDOT figures out which roads to pave. They have an interesting and detailed plan for figuring out your worn pavement. It's a real snoozer. Any questions, council? Natalie?
PPACG is working on an economic development strategy as well. And I volunteered to be on that committee as I'm currently representing the Manitou Art Center. But if it makes sense to share updates with council, I'd be willing to do that along the way.
Okay, that'd be great. Yeah. I didn't think that was quite mature enough to bring it up, but since you volunteered, that'd be great. So if you want to carry that load, that would be great. You can bring us up to date periodically.
Okay.
Excellent. Denise?
Mayor, I just want to mention, we're also reaching out to PPACG to see how we can bring senior classes here. So we're seeing what partnership we can have. We don't have any answers to that yet, but we are reaching out to see how we can.
Excellent. I think that's a good thing. And it may be that we could provide, some services to our seniors at almost no cost, or if they had no cost. So we're already paying to be part of this. So great. If there are no other questions, I'm sorry, Judith.
Mayor, the city administrator answered one of my questions. I just had a question about the yellow book. Is that something that we can get in bulk and give out? I mean, I've seen one somewhere before, but I haven't seen them in quite a while.
Yeah, we can. I think there's some available at the library. I'll try and get a couple cases to bring to City Hall here so that we can pass them out, have them available. So that'd be good. Those are free. The yellow book that she's referring to is essentially it's yellow pages for seniors, if you will. It provides a listing of various kinds of senior services, some for-profit, some nonprofit, but it's kind of it provides alternatives for people who are looking for various kinds of services, the kinds of things that we just looked at in the slides. So I'll try and have those here next week. Great. If there's no questions, we'll move on. Okay, our next item, we've got a hearing, second reading and public hearing of ordinance number 0223, an ordinance repealing and reenacting chapter 15.04 of the Building Code of Manitou Springs Municipal Code to adopt by reference the 2023 edition of the Pikes Peak Regional Building Code. And since this is a public hearing, we will first start off by hearing from our planning director. Hannah, you have the floor.
Great. Thank you, Mayor Graham. For the record, Hannah Van Nimwegen McGuire with the City Planning Department. I just wanted to communicate that there have been no changes since the first reading of this ordinance. However, we do have representatives from the Regional Building Department here in case there are any additional questions.
Okay, thank you. Council, what I might suggest is that if we would like to, we can go ahead and do the public hearing, get any public comments there are. And then at that point, let the regional building officials respond to the public's questions and anything that we have. In the interest of time, I think that might be okay. No objections. Okay, great. Thank you, Hannah. Okay. And Roger and Gina, if you're okay with that, we'll go ahead and see if there are other questions from the audience, and then we'll let you have the mic. Yeah. So at this point, I will open up the public comment portion of this hearing. Anyone who would like to speak to this is welcome to come up and speak on the mic. Same rules apply, 3 minutes, and we just need your name and address. Do we have any takers? This has not been a very controversial thing in Manitou, so I'm not entirely surprised. Okay, last call. All right, I'm going to close the public comments portion. Council, let's see if you have questions, and if so, we'll bring up the appropriate representatives. Do we have questions?
I'm ready to entertain a motion.
Let's see, do we? I think, okay, looks like we're ready for motion. Okay, Judith, would you like to make the motion?
Yes. I move that we approve on second reading and public hearing ordinance 0223, an ordinance repealing and reenacting chapter 15.04, the building code of the Manitou Springs Municipal Code to adopt by reference the 2023 edition of the Pikes Peak Regional Building Code.
Do we have a second? Seconded by Councilor Wolf. Any discussion or deliberation? Apparently not. Let's go ahead and vote.
Six to zero in favor.
Okay, great. Thank you. Motion passes unanimously. Roger, Gina, thank you for coming. I hope it was sufficiently exciting for you to make the trip. So, great. Thank you very much. We'll give you a minute if you want to. Oh, and J2, I'm sorry. Thank you for coming. Okay, next item, second reading and public hearing for ordinance number 0123, an ordinance repealing and reenacting section 13.04.020 of the Manitou Springs Code of Ordinances concerning connection required, section 13.08.050, connection charge, and section 13.20.010, charges established. And we have our finance director, Becca Davis, to walk us through this. Becca?
Good evening. This is the second reading of this ordinance, and there have been no changes to it compared to when you were first presented it. And I'm available for questions.
Okay. And since this is a public hearing, I guess I would propose the same format that we just did, and to give anyone in the audience a chance to comment, that would give Becca the opportunity to answer those questions as well. Becca, maybe you can go just stay there. Let's see if there's anybody who wants to speak to this. I'm going to open up the public comment portion. Anyone in the audience who would like to speak to this is welcome to do so now. Do we have any takers? This has not been controversial, so I don't think we're surprised. If there's, and Judy, we didn't have any emails or anything. Okay. If there's no one interested in that, I'll go ahead and close the public comment. All right. Council, do we have any questions for Becca? If not, we can entertain a motion. Natalie?
I move to approve ordinance number 0123, an ordinance repealing and reenacting section 13.04.020 of the Manitou Springs Code of Ordinances concerning connection required, section 13.08.050 connection charge, and section 13.20.010 charges established on second reading.
Okay, do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Fortune. Any further discussion or deliberation? If not, let's vote.
Six to zero in favor.
Okay, great. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Becca.
Thank you.
I think it took longer to read the title of the motion than it did to, or the item than it did to vote. Great. Okay, next item, major development plan, MDP 2301, major development plan at 701 Manitou Avenue. That's the Carnegie Library Building by the applicant, the city of Manitou Springs, and we're again joined by Hannah. And
Great, thank you. So for this evening, we are presenting a major development plan. This major development plan was heard by the City Planning Commission on February 22nd. We do have a three-part presentation tonight. We'll start with staff's presentation from our senior planner, Chelsea. Then we'll move on to the architect, Leanna, and then we'll close with a presentation regarding the tree canopy. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to Chelsea.
Thank you, Chelsea Stromberg, for the record. So we have major development plan 2301 for an expansion to the library. We are proposing a 2,950 square foot addition to the historic Carnegie Library. The addition will include a two-story structure to accommodate accessibility features that comply with the Americans with Disabilities Act. And a new one-story garden level space for library services, study rooms, and a rooftop patio. The major development plan is required for expansion of existing non-residential development by 30% or more. The proposed addition would increase the square footage by approximately 85%. Oh, okay. Excuse me. I'm still new here, so. So as you're all aware, in 2020, the library was found to be unable to meet the standards set forth by the Americans with Disabilities Act, and the Pikes Peak Library District temporarily relocated library services to the Manitou Arts Center. The city and the Preserve and Renew Our Carnegie Library Task Force have worked since then to develop a design which complements the original architecture, is compliant with the Secretary of Interior's standards for rehabilitation, and is providing the necessary improvements which will allow the building to be re-inhabited and reopened to the public. So we have several findings and criteria for major development plans. These standards, the plan does meet the recently adopted Land Use and Development Code. So the major development plan is generally consistent with Plan Manitou. It meets primarily three goals. Goal number one is to support the retention and expansion of venues, facilities, event space, et cetera, and promote educational opportunities for residents of all ages. Goal EDU 2.3 is to promote the creation and growth of programming that supports learning throughout all stages of life. And goal HC 4.5, maintain and enhance existing cultural and historic resources as part of infrastructure and transportation improvements. The site plan also complies with several dimensional standards such as setbacks, height restrictions, et cetera. And it complies with all of our water, sewer, fire protection requirements. It does not affect roadway design. And I will let our architect go into the details of the design itself. I just want to touch on a couple little items, such as parking was a big item. We are expanding parking on the site to allow for one ADA accessible space. Planning Commission did discuss why there weren't more spaces accommodated on site. This was due to input by Parib, which requested that we maintain as much of the park space as possible. So one ADA space was the compromise there. Landscape will be primarily preserved as is, with the exception of some trees, which we'll touch base on later. The area of disturbance for the proposed addition is as limited as possible to minimize the jeopardization of existing mature landscaping, as well as the historic lawn. For lighting, the lighting plan is primarily, sorry, thank you, Judy. So lighting proposed for this is designed to
match the historic light fixtures, which are not typically, they're globe features, which don't meet current dark sky standards. However, due to their location under the large eaves of the roof, they will be essentially full cutoff fixtures. So that way we're able to maintain the historic appearance while also complying with dark sky standards. I'm a little out of order here. I apologize. So one other item I wanted to touch base on was the geologic hazards and the the geologic hazards report, which did state that there were some unstable soils on the site. However, to the west of the existing building, which is where we're proposing to, the south and the west is where we're proposing to expand the building. There are more standard soils, and whatever is unstable can be removed and then compacted, which is a standard approach for unstable soils. Staff does recommend approval of the subject application, and we're also requesting to waive city fees, as that would be a cyclical fee. So I will pass it along to our architect.
Hi, I'm Leanna De La Torre with Ratio Architects. And if we can go ahead to the slides, I believe we have our presentation that we provided for the planning department. There we go. So this will just kind of go over a summary of the proposed design. And we can move ahead. So we are working with JVA Structural. They do have a lot of experience on historic properties. We're working with Elevation Consulting for our civil design, and Ballard Group for mechanical and plumbing, Innovative Electric Systems for electrical, and then we are also doing the landscape design in-house. So that is Ratio Design as well. And we can kind of touch base. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the library, as it's just across the street. But it is a historic Carnegie library. And so we're just trying to make sure that we are very consistent with not only the Secretary of Interior standards, but also with the character and the feel that this building provides for Manitou Springs. As Chelsea mentioned, we're essentially doubling the size of the library with the building addition. We're minimizing the impact on site. As you'll see in the next couple slides, the main portion of the building addition is set to be recessed within the grade. It's a notably sloped site, so we're able to do that and still provide windows and daylighting on the north end of the site, and minimal impact on the upper level. This is just some additional information following up on the amount of site that will be paved, the amount of site that will be disturbed. One proposed ADA parking space, just noting that we are following the setback limitations, and just providing some additional information on kind of the more specific details of square footages, things like that. This is basically just the noting that the city is the owner of the property.
A lot of this is required in our code for submittal of the application, which is why it was included in this package.
All right, so here you can just see some more context photos of what the existing conditions are. These are just kind of for reference to paint the picture of what it looks like today versus what we're proposing it looks like in the future. And I think we have one more slide of the existing conditions as well, maybe. Oh, no. This is just showing how the building is set back from the site. It does not follow the kind of street frontage that is typical along Main Street. And that will be maintained. And basically, we're just showing these renderings in the photo are showing what the addition will be, really to emphasize how minimal the impact is to the site. And really kind of tucking the addition to really make it set back from the existing building and really give prominence to that historic construction. This is kind of referencing some of the Secretary of Interior standards that we're using and talking about how an addition can touch a historic building. So really working on how we touch it very lightly. We're proposing a new glass vestibule that will be the entrance to the library. So not only will this provide wayfinding on the site to tell visitors where the entrance to the library is by making this space look different, and that's on both the upper level and the lower level, but it also, that lightness of the glazing really emphasizes how we are touching that historic building as lightly as possible. And then you can see on the upper level, we've got the addition that has the stair and the lift for accessibility that is referencing the existing building architecture. But another important standard in Secretary of Interior standards is that the addition is of its own time. So, which we will be emphasizing with material selections. So as I mentioned, the form of the addition is very small. It's basically the upper level is going to follow the geometries, the materiality, the roof work of the existing building, but much smaller, located on the south end to really kind of maintain that emphasis of the existing building on the site. And then as you can see in the bottom image, the bottom and middle image, the main addition will have a little bit of a more modern design. It'll have a parapet wall around a roof deck. So this roof deck will also provide access that is accessible for park visitors, library visitors, to be able to use a level surface, but also maintaining that park space. And then you can see the glazed storefront addition and how that touches the building on the lower level as well. Here's just a site plan showing the amount of space that the existing building takes up versus what the proposed addition will be. So really kind of tucking the addition onto that southwest corner of the site as much as possible to maintain the prominence of the park. And these are some elevation studies to show what the existing elevation looks like versus what the new will be. So here you can see on the east side, which will be the main entrance to the library, how we'll have, we're going to utilize the existing opening in the site wall to provide access for that one accessible parking space. And then it'll focus entrance toward the new addition on the upper level. This is the west side. This probably has one of the bigger impacts. Just kind of really showing how we are recessing the building within the site, really utilizing the geometry of the sloped site to minimize our impact, and how we will have that daylighting, and the main space that you will see of the addition will be on that southwest corner. This shows the view from the south side. So really, another focus that we had in the design of the addition was also to provide some transparency so that you could not only minimize the size of the addition, but also be able to see through it and see towards that existing building. And we're also kind of replicating the geometry of the existing windows, maintaining the correct proportions on the addition and what we're proposing for the windows there. And then here you can see the main view of the building that most people will be getting from downtown Manitou and Main Street. Looking up the library, just emphasizing the prominence that the existing historic Carnegie Library really has on the site, and how the addition will promote access, provide additional entrance to the library on the lower level, but really be subservient to the existing building. This provides some detail of what the proposed floor plan will be. The upper level, the existing building, will focus as a community space. So this will be a community room for use for library activities, library functions, as well as community use. It will be available to the public after hours as well. So we created a way to close off access to the rest of the library, but maintain this space to be open There's also just a small storage room, some mechanical electrical closets, and then an accessible restroom on this level. And then the addition will have the stairs and a new lift to provide accessible entrance from the upper level down to the lower level. Lower level will have in the existing building in pink will be the children's library. And then we're providing a new opening in utilizing one of the existing windows. So we're proposing to open that up to flooring level to provide a door to access from the children's library to the addition. And then in green, you'll see the main library space. And then we have some staff workrooms, offices, and then a small study room. These kind of get into the detailing, showing what we propose for the materiality of the addition. So we will be replicating the look of the brick. We'll be doing a brick veneer on the existing or on the addition. And then we're also going to be replicating the look of the detailing. Currently, the existing building has some reveals in the brick. And so we're proposing for the addition, we'll do the opposite. And so instead of reveals, we'll have some sweeps that stick out from the face of the wall to replicate, but not duplicate. For the upper level of the addition, we are proposing to stick with the clay tile roofing. However, we're providing a more modern flat tile. This was chosen not only to replicate the existing look and tie into the existing building and not take away from the architecture, but also because of drainage considerations. The existing building has clay tile roof and that holds a snow load a certain way, that holds water a certain way. So we wanted to maintain that functionality with our addition as well. And then doing some detailing to kind of reference the existing architecture, how it has those very detailed and thoughtful rafter tails that come out from the existing roof, and looking at how we could reference that, but in a more modern way on the addition. Another thing that we proposed is for the addition, we're using aluminum windows. So using a more modern material that is efficient for construction today, but maintaining the geometries and the proportions of the existing windows. And then for the roof deck, to tie this into the site, we'll be looking at a paver system that will reference the stained concrete that is used elsewhere on the site. So making sure that we're tying in visually and not providing an entirely different material. So we're really trying to tie into what the existing conditions of the park are. And this last one's just some more images showing what the addition will look like.
Great. So moving on to the third part of our presentation, I'm going to ask Erin Ringsred, who is our new planner too. Erin has a background in landscape architecture and is a licensed landscape architect, and also the city's arborist, Matthew Nelson. He is a ISA certified arborist, and they will be tackling this last part of the presentation tonight.
Thank you. I am Erin Ringsred, and I'm going to talk about I'm going to talk about the tree canopy and potential impacts based on the proposed site improvements. Next slide, please. We're going to start with the trees that we're going to protect in place around the proposed improvements. These were determined to be appropriate for protecting in place based on 4 criteria: available rooting area, tree species, future occupancy and hazard risk, and then the current tree health and lifespan. The available rooting area is determined by how much of that soil is available for existing trees. Is it planted close to a building, or for example, the site wall, and does that encroach upon where it was allowed to grow throughout its life? And then also understanding, with some of these tree species, they're more prone to certain hazard risks to life and safety, as well as different lifespans. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Matthew to talk about some of the specifics of what we're going to do.
So we're going to do the best we can to protect these trees, the ones that we can preserve in place.
Matthew, if you can get the microphone about 3 inches from your mouth, that works well. There's a TV audience watching you as well.
Perfect.
So yeah, they want to be.
Can you
able
hear me
to
now?
Yeah,
Okay,
good.
super. Next slide, please. So we are going to try to protect the trees that we can preserve with the tools available to us. One of those tools is an air spade. That is a top photo there that allowed us to excavate around the root system, around the trees, and make correct pruning cuts on those roots. I will be doing all that work personally. So that allows us to really kind of select what roots we have to cut and then cut them correctly so we can preserve as much of that tree as possible. The next thing we're going to do is install a tree protection zone. So that's a pretty aggressive fencing around the trees we're going to protect in place. It might also include a couple inches of mulch. And that's just to keep the contractor out from under the trees. So they don't park the trucks under it and run into it and all that. So that will be something that we can monitor through this whole process. I'll be driving by every day to make sure that our contractors are not violating our tree protection zones. That's to preserve what root systems we can. And then the last thing will be pruning the trees. That way they don't tear any limbs off with the truck or any of the lifts. So if any removal needs to be done, it'll be done correctly and proactively rather than with a machine.
Next slide.
Perfect, thank you. So as I spoke about before, during the construction process, I will be actively monitoring for compliance. So we're going to make sure that the contractors are not disturbing the trees that we can preserve as much as possible. I'll be monitoring for change in condition. This will both be visually and photographically. So I'll take pictures of the trees now, during construction, after construction. That way I have a pretty clear log of how the trees are doing and just eyeball mark one. A lot of what I'll be doing is supplemental watering. So we'll be watering these trees pretty actively, particularly as it gets hot and it's dry and they're exposed to all of the construction activity. Perfect. So after the construction process, I'll be visiting these trees even more often to make sure that they don't have a change in condition. There's various ways I can do this just from looking at how much they're growing every year, canopy color, canopy thickness. So I'll be keeping close eyes on all the trees that we can preserve through this whole process.
So the trees that we're able to protect in place are called out in blue on this site plan here. There are several silver maples, a couple ponderosa pines, and then a crabapple. All these measures that we're taking is to reduce the stress on the trees throughout the construction process. Next slide, please. A couple of terms that we're going to use in this next part is the critical root zone. This is the area around the tree that we can sort of determine by the drip line or the edge of the canopy. This is where the most critical root structure occurs on the tree, what gives it nutrients and stability. And then we also touched a little bit earlier on available rooting area. Again, what areas are available for rooting to that tree and how can we kind of anticipate what to expect to find underneath the surface. And then also the tree risk assessment. So this is done by a certified arborist to determine what's the likelihood of failure of branches falling, of the tree falling over, and what would be the potential consequences of those failures. And then also root disturbance. So we know during construction, there's a lot of disturbance that happens. For trees specifically, we're looking at things that would increase impaction or compaction around the root zone. If there's digging, making sure that those things are done through pruning instead of tearing, which could be quite traumatic for the tree, and then soil drying, et cetera, which is why we're proposing some supplemental watering. Next slide, please. So here we have a photo of the south side of the current library structure. You can kind of see in this picture, there are some flags. We went out there to the site and measured based on the current plans where those new improvements approximately would be located in the existing site. Next slide, please. And then I wanted to call it out a little more prominently. So we have the areas outlined in green that represent where we anticipate the critical root zones being for these trees. As you can see, both of these trees that you're seeing surrounded by the green circle are located near a site wall. So we know that the majority of their root structure is occurring to their north side. The red dashed line indicates the extent of the proposed addition. So that what is being added in order to provide ADA accessibility to both floors of the current library. And then the blue dashed line indicates the sidewalk extent as well. The sidewalk here is being added so that that plaza area to the west of the library can be accessed for events that are maybe occurring outside of library time. So if there's a concert in the park, they can provide access back there and experience the park and experience that event just like any other user. Next slide, please. So based on those assessments, we looked at what was available in terms of rooting area. Was it sufficient? If it was found insufficient, what were the tree species and what do we know about their overall lifespan and potential risks? And also looking at that hazard risk, both with what is currently happening around the site and the current health of the tree, as well as what is proposed to happen through construction and the increased visitors that are come back to the library with this addition. So with that, we are recommending these trees that are outlined in red here would be removed. Next slide, please. Just on a high level, trees 1, 2, and 3 are all silver maples. We have determined that they represent a significant risk to life and property through the construction process, as well as their current health. All 3 trees are exhibiting signs of decline. We see significant dead wood in the canopy. We've observed some cavities in the main stem, as well as some root compromise. These tree species are known to be weak wooded and predisposed to failure in that regard. Trees 4 and 5 are 2 ponderosa pines. We are also recommending that these be removed and replaced based on the level of disturbance that would be determined through construction, that they would not have a high likelihood of survival and would result in tree decline. Due to the tree species size, they would not be a good candidate for transplant elsewhere. Next slide, and I'm going to turn it over to Matthew, and he's going to go through them one by one.
Perfect. So tree 1, this is one of the silver maples. It's the one closest to the parking area. It is a large silver maple, 30 inches in diameter. Sounding indicates the main stem is hollow. So sounding is where I go and tap on the tree with rubber mallet all the way around. And I can tell it's hollow like this. That is a silver maple we had to remove in the cemetery. And if it sounds hollow, it is hollow. So that's probably a similar condition to what we have in those trees right there. So there are cavities well up in the upper canopy. This is pretty typical for a silver maple of this age and size. They just kind of get big and hollow. It's just kind of the way that they grow. There's also a lot of deadwood and dieback in the canopy. Again, pretty typical of this size and condition of tree. They've probably been there about as long as the library has. There is evidence of healing, so the tree is still fighting a bit, but that's more typical of the species. Some trees try to outgrow their problems and try to resist their problems, and this tree just tries to outgrow them. The roots seem pretty healthy. I can probe around the trees with a steel probe and make sure there's no big cavities in the roots or anything like that. This tree didn't have any of that. And as we spoke about before, silver maples are notoriously weak wooded. This tree and all of the others show evidence of large branches tearing out in storms, winds, or who knows why. Next slide, please. So the recommendation, unfortunately, on this tree, it is not a viable candidate for tree protection due to age, species, overall health, and anticipated root disturbance during construction. The vast and overwhelming majority of this tree's rooting system would be destroyed during construction, which removes the mechanical support of the tree in addition to its ability to uptake food and water. So unfortunately, we do have to remove and replace this tree with the plan as proposed. Next slide, please. Tree number 2, another large silver maple, a little bigger, 35 inches in diameter. As before, I used the rubber mallet and the sounding indicated the tree is substantially decayed or hollow inside. Cavities in the main or the upper canopy exist as well in this tree. More substantial deadwood and dieback in the upper canopy. Again, pretty typical of age and condition. There is evidence of vigorous healing, so the tree is trying to outgrow its problems. However, the rooting on this tree is compromised. I was able to probe about 12 inches into the undercarriage of this tree, which is concerning. Next slide, please. So the recommendation for this silver maple, it is not a viable candidate for tree protection due to age, species, overall health, compromised root system, and the level of root disturbance during construction as proposed. So we would have to remove and replace this tree. Next slide, please. The third tree is another large silver maple. This one is probably the worst in condition, slightly smaller. It's hollow, as were the other two. Pretty large cavities up in the canopy, substantial deadwood and dieback as well. There's a large wound on the main stem of this canopy, or the main stem of this tree, which is never a good sign. No evidence of root damage. And as with these, all of them are constrained in the rooting area by this wall. You know, normally the tree roots will grow out as far as it is tall in all available directions. These trees didn't have that option because of that wall. So all the rooting is growing towards where the building is proposed to be. Next slide, please. So the recommendation with this tree, as with the other two, it's not a viable candidate for tree protection due to the compromised main stem, age, species, overall health, and the level of disturbance. So we are proposing to remove and replace this tree. So the last two are ponderosa pines. One of these trees is within the building footprint of the proposed addition. So it's we cannot save that tree. And as mentioned before, these trees are too large to transplant. Even with the largest tree spade available, the likelihood of success is virtually nothing. The other tree is probably 3 feet from the building as proposed. We could not preserve enough of that tree's root system to survive, for it to survive. So neither of them are good candidates for protection in place. We'd look to remove and replace.
All right, this next part, we're going to be looking towards the future. How can we approach planting this park for generations to come so that this park continues to serve the community for another 100 years? A few strategies that we're employing here are shadow planting, which is where we plant some smaller trees in the shadow of these larger trees. And as the larger trees decline, these younger trees are going to grow up and take their place. We are also, the existing park site is primarily silver maples that were all planted around the same time. What we are going to do in terms of planting for the future is planting a more diverse tree canopy by having more diverse species within this park site. We're building a more resilient tree canopy. So they're going to be less susceptible to disease, but also have different life cycles and lifespans so that you're not seeing decline all at once from either age or disease. We are also looking at tree species that present lower hazard risks. So looking at ones with stronger wood, less susceptibility to dropping branches, et cetera. And then also what are tree species that we are seeing with a higher success rate here in our region, as well as by their very nature, these tree species are longer lived. Next slide, please. So on this plan here, I've called out in different colors where we're proposing new trees and then where those existing trees exist. So you've got the lighter green at the top, that's where we are maintaining that existing tree canopy. Those are ones that are either being protected in place or not disturbed at all by the construction process. Next slide, please. So 3 species that we're adding to this site. We are replacing one with the Rocky Mountain ponderosa pine. We're adding the autumn brilliant serviceberry, and we are also adding a northern catalpa. Next slide, please. There are 2 species or families of trees that we're looking at here, oak species and maple species. Within the oak family, we're looking at bur oak, Schumer oak, swamp white oak, and red oak. And then with maple, we're looking at the big tooth maple, Norway maple, and State Street maple. Next slide. And we're also looking at novel species. So the ginkgo, Ohio buckeye, Turkish hazelnut, and the Osage orange. Next slide. In conclusion, we believe that by proactively protecting and preserving trees adjacent to the construction disturbance site, we will be able to have a higher success rate for the health and longevity of those trees that we're trying to protect in place. By adding our implementing a new planting strategy for the park, we are ensuring that this park continues to function for generations to come in terms of providing shade for people that are visiting and enjoying themselves in the park. And that we do intend, with these trees that we do unfortunately have to take down, we're looking for opportunities to reuse the wood from these trees that must be removed in order for them to continue to serve this community just in a different way. Thank you.
Great, and that was the conclusion of our presentation. We do recommend approval, or staff recommended approval to the City Planning Commission, who also voted unanimously to recommend approval to the City Council tonight. The next slide does have proposed motion language, if that would be helpful. But at this time, we're ready to take any questions.
Council, questions? Nancy and then Judith.
Just a really quick question. Our tree replacement policy, is it 2 for 1? That we take out one tree we put in, we replace with 2?
I believe the language in the ordinance is a 1-to-1, but if I ever can plant more, I do.
I'm sorry, say that again.
Well, I think the
One-
ordinance as passed was 1 tree lost, 1 tree planted.
Okay.
Which in a lot of places makes sense because we can't put another 30-inch tree in.
Okay, thanks.
No worries.
Judith.
Actually, it was my understanding that the Land Use Development Code table has requirements for the diameter of the tree, how many trees you have to replace, but they don't necessarily have to be on that site if you can't fit them in. So most of these are heritage trees. I don't have a question, but I do have a comment. I am thrilled to finally get before me a real tree canopy, tree preservation and landscape design. It was thorough, professional, well done. I'll be the first to tell you that I cry every time a tree needs to come down, but sometimes trees need to come down, and you did a superb job. And I would this is what I want to see on every single project, especially if we get a contract that says X amount of trees need to come out. And I want that the property and I can't tell you how thrilled and pleased and how professionally presented this is, not only to preserving the tree canopy, but I love all the trees that you propose to put in, but presenting us with a really thorough landscaping plan. And I hope that this is the standard going forward on all other projects that involve tree removal. So thank you.
Thank you. It's very kind.
Great, thank you. Mr. Shada.
I was curious about if somebody could just verify the treatment of any of the new retaining walls that are kind of outside facing that have to do with the site.
Yeah, so for the record, Hannah Van Nimwegen. So we are looking at a couple of different options. So right now we do have a few retaining walls, as you've noted, that are proposed. And actually up at the Public Works facility, there is a number of Manitou granite stones. So we are looking at what it would cost or what the intensity of a project would be to mill that stone and use it as a veneer. We do need to use concrete walls for their structural integrity, but we can use a veneer to kind of make them look more natural or like that greenstone. If it's cost prohibitive to use and mill that stone that's up at the facility, we are looking at a number of options that would look very similar to the site walls that are there currently. So Aaron has actually ordered a sample stone veneer that we think would be a really good match. We are looking at a couple of those. So we would treat it with a stone veneer, whether that was genuine Manitou granite or a very similar lookalike.
So in addition, then the top facing of any of the retaining walls, will that be throughout that site is mainly kind of that red flagstone? Would that be matched as well?
Yeah, it would be fully covered.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
What can I ask one more
Yeah,
question?
John, and then we'll go to
So
Julie.
the west facing wall of the addition, that is brick in that style that we talked about, that you talked about in terms of using the different in and out spacing of the brick? Or I'm sorry, I don't remember what that term was. Please
Yes.
correct me.
Actually, that west-facing retaining wall, we would be proposing to, oh, perfect, our architect who has the formal answer.
Oh, thank you.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna agree. The west face will have brick. And we are gonna look to, we've just been detailing it of how that brick will step down, but it will extend below grade. So we're maintaining the look of the existing building.
Right. And so will it just be just this? It seemed like to me in the depictions in the packet that there was some kind of texture or something like that to kind of add some interest. It just wouldn't be this plain brick wall, right?
Yes, yeah, we will have sweeps, like brick that will stick out about an inch
Okay.
in lines consistent with the existing reveals on the building.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Julie?
The sidewalk that you're proposing, is it going to be concrete?
Yes, it would be a colored concrete to match the existing sidewalk on the site.
Is that consistent with Plan Manitou?
The concrete, the
Yeah, I
usage of
thought we're
concrete?
supposed to always like go toward permeable unless it's
Right.
impossible or
S-
unrealistic.
Right. So a lot of the concrete that or the sidewalk that needs to get added does need to be ADA accessible. And so the concrete is our best bet at getting that. So in order to be ADA accessible, it cannot have any portion be more than 2% slope, and that can be within inches. And concrete is one way that we can make a very consistent surface for ADA accessibility.
And is it still in the HPC code that historic buildings need to replace all windows with wood framed windows? Is that still our law?
It is the preference to replace like for like, and the library does have wood frame windows. So we would, if a window needed to be replaced, we would use a wood frame as well.
Oh, I see. So the proposed aluminum windows is just for the new addition.
That's correct. Yes. If a window needed to be replaced in the historic portion, it would be wood trim.
Thank you.
Other questions from council? John?
So with regard to those aluminum windows in the new addition, is that like aluminum, like white trim that kind of matches the theme of the original building, or is that shiny aluminum look?
Yes, the aluminum will have an anodized finish that is not, it will be a white.
Okay, thank you.
coating.
I was hoping that. Thank you.
Council? I think they've been pretty thorough. Roy?
Yeah, just to touch up on Ms. Chandler's comment about the tree replacement per the ordinance, planting one or more approved trees or plants where the combined value equals or exceeds that which previously existed in terms of species, condition, and size, and location approved by the director. So you would possibly add more trees back into and put them wherever is appropriate. Thank you.
But can we make sure that'll happen, since until a few minutes ago, the understanding was that if it can't squeeze it on the same site, then just.
It will happen. We have 5,000 in the budget right now for trees, right, Matthew? And you've got a plan for replacing trees this year. I don't remember the exact number that you're replacing, but yes, that will occur.
Council, any additional questions or comments? I think the presentation has been very thorough, so we all appreciate that. We know you've worked on this for a long time, and it's been it's been hard. And actually, I was thinking a few minutes ago that March 22nd, 2020, I think was the day that we heard, that Denise and I heard from Pikes Peak Library District that they were going to have to close the library. So tomorrow will be the 3rd-year anniversary. It's time to get this done. Council, yes, Judith,
I would like to entertain a motion.
please.
I move that we approve MDP 2301, the major development plan at 701 Manitou Avenue, the Carnegie Library, by applicant, the city of Manitou Springs.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Any further discussion? If not, let's vote. Okay, let's vote.
Six to zero in favor.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, council. It's unanimous. And I'd like to express my thank you to everyone, and a unanimous vote from council will make the fundraising phase, I think, a little more efficient. So I'd like to think we could break ground before the end of the year. So very good. Thank you very much. Okay. So it was a pretty good chunk of business. I'd like to push on here before we take a break, though. Next item would be approval of Laura Kineseth as a regular member of the Historic Preservation Commission. Laura, are you here? Would you like to come forward? Okay, Laura, we appreciate your interest. If you'd like to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about what you want to do for a few minutes, that would be nice. I'll give council a chance to meet you and learn a little bit about you. So, okay, you need to press the button. The green light will come on. Try to be about 3 inches from the microphone when you speak. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I just wanted to say I really appreciate the opportunity to get to know you and for you to get to know me. I have enjoyed about 35 years or so of working in the historic preservation field, which I have really thoroughly enjoyed. And I would like to continue in that field in some capacity. So my experience in that field has mostly been developing and designing construction documents for historic preservation projects and conducting historic structure reports. I have also reviewed historic preservation grant applications, as well as managing those grant projects. So I'm very familiar with ways to apply Secretary of Interior standards and tailor those standards to each individual project. So, of course, I love living in Manitou Springs with all its great historic character and charm. And it's just so good to see retention of all those original historic, like building materials, design and character. And I think Manitou Springs must be one of the most, if not the most well-preserved little town in Colorado. So I'd be very interested in joining the Historic Preservation Commission and to share my skills and experiences to help with continued good preservation of Manitou Springs.
Great. Thank you very much. Council, comments or questions for Laura? Julie?
We are so lucky to have you. I looked at your resume and I was astounded. So thank you so much for stepping up and volunteering.
Very happy to do it.
Other comments, questions? Judith?
I would like to echo Counselor Wolf's comment. You come highly qualified, and I have to say that the last few board and committee positions that we've filled here in town, we've had an incredibly high caliber of applicants, and you certainly are in that category. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great. If there are no further comments, I'd entertain a motion. Nancy?
Sure. And yes, I too am thrilled that you have chosen to join us. It's very exciting. And as you can see with the presentation we just did, your skills are needed. Anyway, I move to approve Laura Kinseth as a regular member of the Historic Preservation Commission.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilor Johnson. Okay. Let's all vote. Let's go ahead and vote.
Six to zero in favor.
Great. Thank you very much, Laura.
Thank you.
Great.
Mayor, can I make a comment?
Yes, sir.
The last approval of the library, that was supposed to be a public hearing. And so we actually missed the public comment portion of the public hearing.
Okay, Mike.
I was trying to get to your code quickly to make sure I didn't miss something there, but sorry I didn't bring it up right when you were voting. I didn't get to look at it quickly enough. So my recommendation would be nobody's left. So, and I know you already voted to approve it, but my recommendation is you reopen the public hearing, take any public comment that there may be, consider that, and then vote based on all the evidence in front of you. I'm sorry I didn't catch you fast enough. I was looking at it when Councilmember Shader raised the issue, and I just couldn't get to your code quick enough to cut you off. So my apologies for not getting to you quicker.
No, that's okay. And my apologies also, but I think we can fix this pretty quickly. So, okay, we will go back to the agenda item. Yes, H3 MDP 2306 Major Development Plan at 701 Manitou Avenue, Carnegie Library by the applicant, City of Manitou Springs. Okay, and we have already, of course, covered some of the base, so I will go ahead and declare the public comment portion of this public hearing to be open. So if there's anyone who would like to speak to this, this is your opportunity to do so.
And Mayor, just for the record, I didn't see anybody actually leaving, so I don't think we lost any of the citizens who were here to actually comment on this, just for the record.
Thank you, and I would concur with that. Just kind of watching. Okay, so if Mary, if you would give us your name, address.
I would. So I'm Mary Pulvermacher and I live at 20 Craig Lane. As all of you know, I'm a member of the Preserve and Renew our Carnegie Library Task Force, and we've been collaborating with the city for over 2.5 years on this. And I got to say, I am thrilled, and then thrilled that we're at this gate, this final approval gate for the library. I applaud all the hard work it's taken to get us to this point by so many who have worked and contributed to this. I think the community engagement process that was used was a model for effectiveness in terms of community input. I don't think it was especially expedient, but it was certainly very, very effective. And the design that we have that Ratio has put together is incredible. I think it's a model for our city. It's stellar. I also think that the renovated Carnegie building is going to be the crown jewel in our historic Manitou Springs. So I appreciate the fabulous and unwavering support also of the Pikes Peak Library District that's been working on this together with the city, and with tonight's approval. I think the city can finally move expeditiously to groundbreaking, to construction and ribbon cutting, thereby achieving an unprecedented access to enrichment and growth for all of our citizens, as well as visitors to our lovely city. And I finally want to thank also all the community members and citizens who have participated and supported this effort through this process. So.
Great. Thank you, Mary. Do we have anyone else who'd like to speak to this? Okay. If not, I will go ahead and close the public comment portion of the hearing. Okay. And Mr. Parker, I guess we can go right to a vote.
Yeah, my recommendation is that you just revote based on that new evidence. If you change your mind, you can go ahead and do that.
Oh, we don't need a new motion?
You need, well, yeah, you need a new motion, a
Okay.
second, and then a vote.
I move to approve.
Okay, we have motion to approve.
Second.
With motion. Okay, with motion the second. I will not ask for further deliberation. Hearing none. Okay, anyway. Okay, Judy, if we can vote.
And we got a 6 to 0 in favor again.
Okay, great. Thanks. Thanks for catching that, Mr. Shada. Yeah, no, it's good that we do it the right way. There's a little bit of Manitou style in that, I think. So great. All right. So, Mr. Parker, we're good?
You are good. Thank you so
Okay,
much.
thank you. No, thank you. Okay, next item, we have a resolution of hazard mitigation plan adoption. Okay, so we could go ahead and entertain that. Okay, Hannah, you have the floor.
Great, thank you. So I just wanted to introduce this item really quickly. For the record, Hannah Van Nimwegen, Planning Director for Manitou Springs. To my right is Kelsey Lanham. She's our planning technician and has helped manage this project. Further down, we have Jeff Brislon, who is our consultant on this particular project. And at the end of the table, we have Keith Buckmiller, who has also helped put this plan together. So with that, I will turn it over for a presentation.
Thank you. And for the record, I'm Kelsey Lanham. And so in the packet today, we did include the final draft and then the HIRA assessment. I do apologize because I know this packet was about 300 pages and this item contributed about 200 of it. But we wanted to make sure you had all the maps this time. And so we do have a quick presentation. It's very similar to the one that you guys saw in the work session back in January. But it basically covers where we were, where we are, and then the final steps of this updated plan. So I will pass this on to Jeff and he will do the presentation.
Thank you. For the record, Jeff Brislon with WSP USA, the consultant for the Hazard Mitigation Plan update. Could I get the next slide, please? We've already done introductions. I think we can move on. Why is the plan needed? This is a requirement of the Disaster Mitigation Act of 2000. So every community in the United States needs one of these plans if they want to remain eligible for certain pre and post disaster mitigation grant funding from FEMA. But in addition, there's other benefits to this plan. It's really about looking at ways to reduce disaster and hazard impacts to the city of Manitou Springs and its residents and increase the resiliency and the safety for everyone that lives here in the town. Next slide, please. We followed a structured mitigation planning process in 4 phases that are shown on this slide. And we're actually in phase 4, which is the adoption and implementation part. So we've gotten to the point where it's the city needs to consider formally adopting it, and then actually implementing the plan is really the ongoing phase. And this is meant to be a living plan that's revisited annually to ensure that it's the actions in it are implemented. Next slide. Our project schedule, we formally kicked this off almost a year ago in March. And so we are actually now at the point where the plan has been submitted it's been through a public process, public review, public meeting, and now the plan also has been reviewed by the state of Colorado, and it's at FEMA currently for review. And we're here today to adopt it. Next slide, please. This plan does include an in-depth look at the hazards and the potential vulnerabilities of the city to those hazards, with flooding, mud and debris flow, and wildfire being some of the ones that could cause the most damage and impacts. But there's a number of mitigation actions or projects that are identified in the plan to reduce the impacts of those hazards when they occur again. And through the process of the update, we've been able to identify those actions that have actually been implemented. There's been 14 that have been completed since 2017 when the plan was last completed. And so that's showing great progress at the local level. And also in the process, we were able to identify those that are still either being carried forward in the process. Most of those are in some form of completion as well. And then there's 3 new actions that were added to the plan as part of the update process. Next slide. This is just a brief slide that shows some of the details and the actions that were completed. Some of the community wildfire protection plan was updated, that was identified in there. Also looked at some of the grant funding that was pursued, including funding to update this plan as well. And there's a number of positive actions that have been implemented as part of the overall plan update process. Next slide. And there's some just to kind of give you a flavor of some of the other actions that have been completed. In some cases, there were some actions that were evaluated and decided to be removed from the plan for various reasons. Next slide. And then this slide lists some of the new actions that were identified through the planning process, including some evacuation zone identification in case of wildfire or events such as flood or dam failure. Also, some of the ongoing activity around the reservoir for fuels thinning that is actually being completed. That was also identified as a new action. Next slide, please. Since the last time we had the work session in January, we've had a public review process. We had an open house on January 31st. And then we also posted the plan for a 2-week public review, which we did not receive any comments, but that's not uncommon in these types of planning efforts. The plan has been submitted to the state for the Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management, and they have reviewed and recommended some minor revisions. And now the plan is at FEMA since beginning of March for their final review and approval. Next slide. FEMA does have 45 days technically to review the plan, but we're anticipating feedback any day now. And there's a possibility that there could be some minor revisions requested by FEMA before they approve, but we're recommending moving forward with the plan adoption. We're actually a little bit of ahead of schedule. We originally were expected to adopt the plan in July. One of the reasons we're moving forward and recommending adopting today is because there's some new planning guidance that goes into effect April 19th that are being required for plans moving forward. And this plan was developed under the previous guidance. So that's the reason why we think we'll hear from FEMA soon, and we want to get the plan adopted before April 19th. Next slide. And that's the end of the presentation. Happy to entertain any questions.
Okay, Council, looks like Mr. Shada has a question.
You commented on dam failure. So obviously the city of Manitou, we're responsible for our dam, but with regard to the other large dams up around the Pikes Peak area that are owned by the city of Colorado Springs, should those fail, do we have an idea in terms of what we're evacuating when that occurs and how we would know that those dams have failed?
The area that includes the Crystal Reservoir and the Catamount Mountains are all in the same watershed as is our reservoir. So City of Colorado Springs has got their mitigation work and their assessments doing right now. They're rebuilding Crystal Reservoir. But if they were to have a failure, we would have the same catastrophic events in Manitou, regardless of which one of those dams let loose.
Yeah, I understand that. So I'm asking if when that occurs, what's our functional plan for notifying the public and evacuating the danger zones and whatnot? Do we know the impact?
Depending on which one goes, will give us a different variable as far as the alert and the time lag. We do have the siren systems downtown that we've been utilizing since we've had the Waldo fire that we'd enact, as well as law enforcement, making sure we get some areas cleared out and fire to do the same. So we would be into the full evacuation mode as we had exercised in the 2000s when we had the floods from the heavy rains in the Waldo Canyons.
So it would be just a mass evacuation of the city? Is that what the plan would be?
Correct. Our scale would be a little bit larger because we'd have a higher wall coming down than we would for just surface rains coming like in the Waldo Canyon and the Williams Canyon area. So we would have to include higher levels like to the elementary school side instead of just to Manitou Avenue proper. In addition, we would have to have contingencies with Public Works, Public Services to be able to clear some of the debris dams that would be happening as we get narrowing through the Manitou Avenue. So we can get that debris so and create another wall of water and another reservoir where we start to backfill, and then that surface of the water level gets higher.
Well, the reason why I'm asking is because I understand the wildfire thing can happen from any direction, right? So that's a really big wily coyote, but these large bodies of water, we know where they are. We know how much their maximum, water is in them. And I'm assuming we can model if it was a total catastrophic, collapse of the structure, what we'd have to evacuate, right?
Yes, forestry has hydrologists that have studies that will be able to be brought into these equations as we start doing our planning for it on a smaller level, just Manitou Springs. So we know what their flow is, what the GPM is, and what the force is going to be of that water.
Right.
So in all those calculations, we would know where we need to move, and the best thing we can have is alerting. So I'm sure that when they rebuild Crystal Reservoir, they're going to be putting in better sensors so we can have better diagnostics on what's going on up there at all times.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask all that because all these big studies of hundreds of pages that we get, none of us look at that when something like this happens. So I'm just trying to figure out, we have an on the ground plan for understanding, what would happen with some of these hazards. Thank you.
Yeah, and John, if I might mention, on April 11th at our work session, two of the items that we're going to hear that night we'll get a report from Fire Chief John Forsett on the department's evacuation plan. And another item that he will be addressing with Colorado Springs Utilities will be fire mitigation. So he'll be giving us an update at that point. So that's April 11th. So 3 weeks from now. So Keith, I didn't mean to preempt, Chief Buckmiller, I didn't mean to preempt you if you had other things you wanted to respond to.
Can I
I
ask
just
one
want to
more
address
question?
that if you throw a rock into a pack of dogs, the one that yelps is the one that got hit. And I know this plan is very large, but there's a lot of people have different sets of eyes on it where that is pertinent to their world and their livelihood and their job task. John Forsett being one of them, Chief John Forsett. So the views that the fire department takes on that is a little different than the view that public services takes on it. But we all are having a look at that 360-page document. We're all taking sections of it, and those sections are the ones that we just take ownership of. Does that help? I hope.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you. Can I ask one more question in terms of, has the Manitou Hydro Plant been also assessed from the standpoint of a hazard in the event of, a failure of being able to contain that volume of water coming down?
The volume that we would have with the 100 million gallons that we have at both the water tanks, and I guess the one in Crystal Hills is a little bit smaller, so we have to be thinking about that
No,
as
I was
well.
talking about the hydro plant of City of Colorado
Are you
Springs
talking
up on
about
Roxon.
where they have 1100 PSI at the bottom?
Yep.
That's pretty impressive. That's part of their Public Utilities Commission has to have them regulate that to make sure that they can maintain their security of that because they have a threat that they've entered and introduced into the society. So that's a Colorado Springs issue that we can't speak to. But if they did have a break there, it would be more contained. Even though it's got 1100 PSI, it doesn't have a lot of volume to go with it. And therefore, we would be able to have more containment of that water once it gets out of the pipe and then it starts to get wider and lose some of its energy.
Nancy, you're next.
Yeah, I just want to say I share Council Shada's concern about the evacuation, but it would seem that in the new actions for 2023 goals 2.8 on evacuation zone identification, that the planning for that would incorporate also coordination with Colorado Springs.
We have that already in our process. If we have a car that goes into the creek, we know that's going to be their drinking water. They're going to pull it up to the Mesa Tramp. So we have our standard procedures. We notify Colorado Springs and they notify the downstream agencies from them. So yes, we all own this together. We would have a notification that we know we have a problem. They would then be getting that. Matter of fact, they would probably be the ones who would be notifying us because of their supervision that they have above us. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Judith.
Thank you.
I'm looking at the, I believe it's on page 104 of 215, the wildfire risk map for Manitou. And I've asked this question before, but I'll ask it in a different way. So I don't know if we can pull it up or not, but it's the map that has all of the buildings and their relative risk. And I see a lot of very high and extreme coloring on here. I know that the fire department offers the opportunity for residents to have their property assessed. How are we educating our community that this is available to them and how they would access having this service for their property?
I think that would be tagged on to Alex. How's look under the bus there? So that would be falling into Alex's world and that public information. We want to make sure we have a one message. The police department has one messenger. We have one messenger. City council has one messenger. So we only have a coordinated and controlled message that we put out. We can make ourselves available, but I think apathy runs deep. If we have another Marshall fire, we'll have people calling the fire station. We have to have a ready rollout program to tell them what they need to do. But 3 weeks after that happens, we can't get them to cut their grass. So the unfortunate part of that is the threat is short-lived. The ramifications that we see and the prevention measures that we would like to enact are long-term, yet they're not powerful. We don't have a lot of bite because a person's home is their castle and we can't go into their world and make changes. So it has to be a grassroots community organization that will raise that to that awareness level, and then we can help impart the parts of the equation that need to make a change. Does that help?
It does help. So I hear what you hear us saying is that, you know, we need to really access via our public information officer, the opportunity that the residents have and to encourage them to avail themselves of that. So thank you for that, Bucky. I do have one more comment, and that is I try to be very mindful of not killing trees by requesting, you know, hard paper copies of documents. But once this gets the blessing of FEMA and is finalized, I would like a hard copy of this. Our packet tonight was only 605 pages, of which I think this is 215. And I'm one of those council members that I want to have it to review and refresh from time to time. Thank you.
Judith, I was just looking on the city's website. There's a place here, site assessment, protect yourself and your neighbors. That goes into the fire mitigation thing. So that's for anybody in the audience who's interested. You go to the city's website and it's pretty easy to navigate. It's 2 clicks and you're there. So other questions or comments?
Just real quick. I mean, tonight, as I was kind of reviewing this, somebody might want to check the city webpage, but if it says click here to view a full page version of the map, just want to let you know that asks for a user ID and password that's unlikely anybody has.
That's by design. No.
Oh, thanks. That's great. So somebody could look into, you know.
That's where it up.
Thank you.
Okay, always good to know. All right, anything else from council? Okay, well, are we ready for a motion?
We are.
I'll move to approve resolution number 0823, a resolution adopting the 2023 hazard mitigation plan.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, second, and any further discussion? If not, let's vote.
Six to zero in favor.
Great, thank you all. Okay, and we got it done before April the 19th. Excellent, thank you. Council, if there's no objection, let's take a 10-minute break. Okay, let's get started again. So the next item is I3, approval by City Council, the match board's recommendations for the 2023 grant awards. This was something that was discussed last week in a work session. There were some follow-on questions that had come up.
Mayor,
And
before we
so-
begin, Mayor, I would just like to recuse myself from this
Yeah.
conversation.
Okay, and yeah, and I wanted to speak to that. Yeah, so
Okay.
Natalie, if you just quickly would mention why you're
Why?
recusing yourself.
Sure. So this is my job, about 60 hours a week. So professionally, not only as the director of the Manitou Art Center, but just my work supporting creatives in the community. And so I feel integrally tied to almost all of the applicants.
Okay, thank you. And I should mention that I was also one of the applicants who I applied for one of the Indigenous Peoples Award. It was a $6,000 request. The recommendation from Match is to grant that. I've checked with our attorney. I don't materially get anything from it. I was basically the person who filled out the grant. I've done that for 2 years. The money's held in a separate bank account. So my understanding from Mr. Parker is that I don't need to recuse myself. If there's anyone in the audience who isn't comfortable with that, I'd be happy to do so. So Mr. Parker, I'll look for your
Well,
advice.
I just want to clarify that it wasn't you are not the applicant. You just basically helped complete an application for another group and you support the application. So you don't personally benefit. It's not an entity that you work for or associated with. You just support the application. So the fact that you help fill out an application for an entity does not disqualify you from voting on it.
Thank you for that clarification. That said, if there's anyone counselor in the audience who's not comfortable with me being here, I can recuse myself and Nancy will take over for this portion of the meeting. Okay, I guess I'm still employed. All right, okay. Neil Mensch, who was the presenter and he's the chair of the match board, had suggested that there were several complaints that came up last week, and I think he'd like the individuals to have an opportunity to speak to that. So as we have Dave Wolverton and Peggy Yeager, if you two would like to present your sides of the situation. Oops.
My name is Dave Wolverton. I live at 213 Pilot Knob.
Peggy Yeager, 19B East Fountain Place.
Okay, thank you. Okay, you've got the floor, so your chance to speak.
Well, I think we submitted some content for your packets, and I think we pretty much outlined some of the issues that we're concerned about. We're here tonight to talk mostly about the process. I think I suggested to you, Mr. Mayor, in a conversation last week that I thought it'd be appropriate for this particular item in the city's list of things that it's involved with to outsource the jury process for this for a number of reasons. I think as you continue down this process of approving this, it might seem more obvious. I'm not sure how this is going to unfold, but our process, as I outlined and Peggy wrote in her letter, made clear that there was a lot of confusion on the part of the board members, particularly the board chair, of who was eligible, how it was going to be judged. It was going to be judged through a filter at one point. There was no criteria for the filter. And now we got to see in this packet how, what the reasoning was for the grant being turned down. And apparently there was some understanding on the mock board that that Miramont Council wasn't on board with the grant application, and I can't imagine why. I think I have a tremendous track record of doing projects and certainly a huge track record of philanthropy in the community, that you would somehow doubt my credibility that in identifying the recipient of my work that was proposed in my grant application, that there would be some nefarious activity that Miramont somehow wouldn't be on board with what my proposal was going to be. So there was a lot of, absent of picking up the telephone and doing your due diligence as a board member of a jury process. If you found doubt in something in a grant application, I think the onus of responsibility is on the jury to find out if there's a gap in the information that you're uncomfortable with, find some resolution to that gap. But I think my application was included in your packet this week. I think it was one of the most well-articulated applications in the packet. It's also one of the larger grant requests, and I felt that I needed to articulate the details of the project at a level and an understanding so everybody could understand at the end of the day what the end product would be. And the same process was done at Miramont with Peggy and her colleagues. We've gone down this road and made sure that all the I's were dotted and the T's were crossed. And quite frankly, I read that web page that had the criteria for the grant application about 6 times. And I was sure after I wrote the application, I read it one more time to make sure I didn't leave anything out. So the Q&A process that I was originally asked not to participate in because I was told that a tier 1 entity wasn't eligible for tier 2 funding. I requested that I could participate because I wanted to inspire other applicants to propose projects that had more of a residual lasting effect to the community rather than they seem heavily into events last year. And they agreed to let me participate. And then we found out afterwards that that a tier 1 entity is eligible for tier 2 funding. So I think that in all fairness, if there was real concerns about whether Miramont was going to be on board, that there should have been another Q&A conducted to clarify that. But also, as Peggy pointed out in her letter, apparently I wasn't a participant in the tier 1 discussion, but apparently there was some clarification that was offered for the Heritage Center. And I think the same would, in all fairness, should have been offered to our project.
Peggy?
Well,
Peggy, did you give us your name? And obviously we know, but just for the record, we need name and address.
Oh, I did. My address?
Yeah.
Oh, 19B East Fountain Place.
Okay. And can you get the microphone about 3 inches from your mouth? Records better that way. Okay. Thank you.
Better?
Yes. Thanks.
The whole thing was, there was the Keithley project, and I'm not against any of these projects. I think they're all wonderful. But the Keithley project was going to the Heritage Center to the point that Neil recused himself when they gave when he talked during the Q&A. So for them to say that a tier 1 couldn't get tier 2 money, the Keithley project should have been disqualified also. And that didn't happen. It was just ours. And then it comes, well, because I hadn't completely specified where every penny of the match money was going to go to, that we could fund it. I didn't hear any other entity, tier 1 entity, being suggested that they fund somebody else's grant. That isn't fair. And I just think the whole thing was handled poorly, because Neil being on the match chair and being the Heritage chair, he had opportunities to clarify on their talks on the tier 1 money. Nobody else had that opportunity. It's cronyism.
Okay. Council, do you have questions or comments for Dave or Peggy? Nancy?
What's the outcome? I heard Mr. Wolverton say that he's primarily interested in process for the future. Are you looking to appeal your grant proposal and get it awarded this year?
I appreciate that question. I think that's a great point because I cannot find anywhere on the website where there's any process for protest. I was watching this process on the first year and I didn't submit an application for a project because I felt that it was still in its infancy and it was going to have some kinks. So I waited for the second year. But if you go look on the website, there's no process for a protest. If they decide that your grant is ineligible, that's it. That's the end of the process. There is no process to move forward in a protest situation. So we didn't get offered any funding for this grant.
So again, I'm not sure what the outcome that you're looking for is. Is it just for the council address process? Or are you looking to overturn the decision of the board? Or not the recommendation of the board, I should say.
Our goal, my suggestion is this process be outsourced to a nonpartisan outside of the city entity where there's not the optics of conflict of interest. Council appointed Neil to the board of the mock board, knowing that he's a board member of a tier 1 entity. In my opinion, that's a very, obvious conflict of interest, and that set the stage for, drawing these questions and questioning the fairness of the process. You've got a counselor that recused herself. There's a number of things that, have these conflicts of interest that I think are becoming apparent in the process. And I think you should really consider outsourcing this process in the future, because I just think this is going to be problematic in a town that's this small to try and run a fairly run process like this. There's just too many options or opportunity for cronyism and favoritism. And like I said, they move the goalpost on us at every juncture in this process. And we found out that this claim that the tier 1 entity wasn't eligible for the tier 2 funding, that should have been something the board knew. I understand there's a recommendation on what's going to be before you to make a decision of an event that took place in Soda Springs Park last year that wasn't accepted by the community. There was a lot of blowback by Manitou citizens, and it's back up for recommendation. So this idea that this would be somebody with their thumb on the pulse of the community is, I don't think, consistent with that thinking. I also think, like I said earlier, that if there was some doubt that my application didn't include that Miramont wasn't on board, I probably have more philanthropy under my belt than anybody in this room. I should have some credibility. Just the fact that I put my references on there, I shouldn't have been questioned in my case because I have such a long resume of accomplishments in philanthropy. But pick up the phone. I mean, that's why you get a job applicant before you pick up the phone, you call the references, right? Because you don't want to just go on a leap of faith. And if there's any doubt, the onus of the responsibility is on you to verify that the references are in fact truthful. And I just see that that process did not occur in this process.
Yeah, Nancy.
Just to comment on that, and I've written a lot of grants and I have sat on granting boards in the past. And in all of my experience, grants have to stand on their own. I've never sat on a board where we would call the applicant and ask them to fill it in. The grant application had to stand on its own. And I've never been called by a granting agency when I've submitted grants with them asking me questions to fill out the grant. So I don't know what your experience has been to the contrary, but that's been my very strong experience.
Well, to address that, I think that's why I included my application in your packet, was so you could see that the grant explained in very good detail that Miramont was a participant in this. It's going to take a lot of coordination with the day-to-day operations of their facility. And all of that's been discussed with Miramont, and it's all in that grant application. There's no oxygen left to doubt whether Miramont was on board. I think that's a good point. Counselor Fortune, and I think I did a pretty good job of articulating that in that narrative of my grant application.
Dave, and Peggy, last week we were talking about this at the work session, and of course you weren't here. There's several things, there were a number of things that came up, and and that sort of tempers the way we're looking at this. I think there were several things that the way the grants have been handled, or some of the decisions been made, some that I think is probably, there's some learning experience that wasn't originally anticipated. And it's, I think the match board, agreed that it's time to go back and look at some things, and some things need to be cleaned up and fine tuned. Okay. So would that help in the future? It might. Does it help right now? Not so much. Another point was when we asked Neil if if really it made sense to deny some of the applicants, the tier 2 applicants, and approve others, kind of a line veto. And that wasn't what they recommended. The match board who was here, with 4 representatives, I think we had at the table where you are now, they felt pretty much they had crafted this as a package, and that's how they wanted it to be entertained. So to go back and to redo this presents a problem in terms of timelines. There are some things that, where the school district is an applicant and they want to get things, they have some things that they would like to do before the end of the school year. So timing becomes an issue. So I'd ask you to understand that. You showed me your project. Personally, I think it's a neat project. At some point, I'd like to see it go forward. To me, it seems like this isn't the year taken, in the context of everything. For instance, one of the other applicants, Mahori Hara, I guess, I'm not sure what that was about, but they were denied a grant because it looked in the estimation of the match board, it looked like the funding was going to go to the applicant instead of the event, or whatever was supposed to do. And that, I think, maybe was one of the points where it looked like you were going to be the financial beneficiary of this rather than say Miramont Castle. So, there's a question, and I guess you could argue that's, you would benefit. You'd get paid for your professional services, but the community would benefit. Miramont Castle would benefit. We'd all know more about Manitou history. There were a couple other things. The Keithley Photo and Document Preservation Project, the match board did say project could be helped by the Heritage Center with its tier 1 funding. So the relationship between tier 1 and tier 2, it seems to me like was recognized on the Keithley project, as well as been a concern for years. Hiawatha Gardens also, there's our tier 2 request to do a mural at the Hiawatha Gardens. And the match board suggested that this be referred to the Hiawatha Gardens Task Force since it was receiving match funding. So, I think there's an element of consistency in that. I think the board was trying to be fair and consistent. So that's how I see it. I don't know if there's a completely happy answer for everybody tonight. Dave?
Yeah, I guess I would respectfully disagree, because on that Q&A, at the end of the Q&A, Neil brought up a spreadsheet that had our project already crossed off, yet he left the Keithley project up for discussion. So he had already told me that tier 1 entities were disqualified from tier 2 funding. Yet knowing that, he was there recusing himself, knowing that there's another project that was slated for a tier 1 entity, and it happened to be his. And that was a blatant demonstration of a conflict of interest right there, to have disqualified us, but move forward with a project that directly benefited the Heritage Center, knowing it was a tier 1 entity. That right there, that was the evidence that raised my eyebrows. That's why I'm here tonight, is that's what got me to start watching the project and threw a red flag that that's an unfair, that's not a level playing field, sir.
I think Judith, and then I think Nancy.
I wouldn't mind hearing from Neil on this issue as well, if Neil would want to speak. I am grateful to the match committee for sending us the just a little description that really helped me a great deal. I easily looked at the tier one and was comfortable with the allocations of money. Tier two, I did have some questions. Most of them have been resolved. I did have an issue with the concerns and complaints that we got about the Summerfest concert. I live over on Becker's Lane, so when I'm getting complaints, you know, I know that people are unhappy. That said, I think we're starting to learn that it is time to make some changes. I'm not comfortable with funding things in the future where there is a cost to the participant to participate. So I would think that that's something we need to talk about. I don't know if we can, I don't think that, you know, that I agree with the mayor that these line item vetoes would be very difficult and non-productive. The productive part and the good thing is these problems are surfacing of which you have a legitimate concern and a legitimate issue here. We need to take a look at that. We need to take a look at making sure in our language that that we are not funding churches for church activity. I did have a better understanding about the lights and security cameras for the church, and I can see where that fits into the heritage piece. It's a historical building. But with regards to what all transpired, to me, the only logical, fair way to address this would be to have both you and perhaps the Keithley Pines photography archive resubmit next year. That would be my only, maybe recommendation, because I think at this stage of the game, I do think that this needs to be on a work session in the future before we attempt to do this again. And we're learning as we go. So I'm having a tough time with this one. I think that all of those projects are worthy, and I think there was some issues that happened that I think that we can clean up. I just don't know if we can clean it up for this cycle. Thank you.
Thank you. Nancy, I believe you had comments.
Yeah, that was going to be a lot of what I wanted to say as well. I think line item at this point is not at all fruitful. And it would set a precedent that I think would be not good. And you can always apply next year. And I think that you do have a strong application, a very strong application. But again, to me, as I already mentioned, an application needs to stand on its own, and it really didn't in this particular case, in my opinion, without the support. I mean, after the fact, we got the letter and the board got the letter, but not in time to be considered. And let me keep talking. So I think it'd be a very bad precedent. And I'm fine. I'm beyond fine. I think we do need to address some policy issues, as I mentioned last week. I think that the match board, as you know, I think has done an outstanding job in 3 years. Nothing is perfect. I don't expect perfection. I expect to get as close to perfection as possible. And I think the match board has worked incredibly hard in what is ultimately a fairly subjective assessment and analysis of, all of these grants with some boundaries put on them. But when you think about it, most granting organizations, you only look at one area, whether it be art or trails or whatever it might be. In this case, everything and its brother is being thrown under and can be defined and lumped under arts, culture, and heritage. So I think that makes their challenge just that much more difficult. So I'm all for itemizing or listing some of the concerns that have been raised and addressing them in a work session, or even asking the match committee to go back, take a look at some of these concerns and come back with their recommendations and how they might address them. I do know that
conflict of interest is defined. I don't think that Neil's issue was the legal conflict of interest, but I think it was a perception of conflict of interest. And I'm looking at Jeff as I say that, because Neil did not get any money himself in his own pocket.
I'd have to take a look at the facts before I could just throw out whether there's a conflict. The rules are complicated. It depends
Yeah.
upon if you have an interest in a business or not that's going to get funding, if you're then compensated by that. So I hate to just throw out a yes or no on
That's
this.
all right.
I definitely look into it.
I'll just say that that has in the past been my understanding of conflict of interest, but there's a perception of conflict of interest that is, of course, of concern as well, that I think that we need to address. So I would prefer not to do any vetoes. I would like to look line item vetoes tonight. I personally would like to approve the slate that has been presented before us, and then look at some of these larger process and policy issues in the future. Thank you.
Mr. Shada?
Yeah. I had Neil send me a spreadsheet of all of it, and people I think in this room know I'm kind of a data and a spreadsheet kind of a freak. And so there were 69 projects for this board to evaluate that had lots of different dimensions to them. By my numbers, 74%, okay, of projects got funded. All right, in terms of, and only 26% didn't. And so I think councils express kind of our interest in maybe kind of modifying this process in the whole 9 yards. And I'm sympathetic, Dave, to your comment that we would maybe use an outside entity, but I can see how that can be just as complicated and just as wily as our own community. So I think it's a hard process. And so I was curious about kind of what you wanted us to do, putting yourself in our shoes. And I'm equally very uninterested in nitpicking over this list because we don't have all the information. I don't have that kind of time to go through all 69 in the way the committee looked at them. And so unless I was prepared to be that thorough and spend that amount of time, I guess I can't feel like I can pull it off. So I hope that what you would see is that this is a process we're figuring out. I think this match thing is probably one of the most amazing things that this community can do for itself. I'm very excited about the different kind of sizes of projects and the diversity. I find that pretty amazing. So I would hope that you would apply again next year or the next cycle. And maybe the criteria will have changed a little bit. Maybe some of this process will be a little bit different. Okay. And so I think it's a moving target. And so I guess I need to stop talking. Thank you.
All right, thank you, John. I guess I'd also like to speak to something you said there, Dave, and you'd accused of, the match board of cronyism, particularly, you said Neil has conflict of interest. When we were putting the match board together, and that was right before COVID, if I remember right, we were trying to do the right thing. I think we had 13 applicants for 7 regular positions and 3 alternates. And we had some pretty talented people who were committed to the community. I mean, like you and Peggy also. But it's a small community. We often wear multiple hats. And the question did come up, I think it was when we were thinking of Neil becoming chair, and we thought, he's got, 1 foot in the Heritage Center, and you have 1 foot in match. And we thought about it and said, really, he's got a lot of talent. He's got a lot of integrity. So, that's what I remember me telling myself. And I think that was the sentiment at the time. We felt he was a good man for the job. We thought we also had a pretty good crew for the match board. And, and it was a brave new world. I mean, if you remember, the previous council had not basically ratified the match proposal. The council that came in 2020 did. And then we kind of moved forward and tried to put things together. And there's an iterative process when you make something like this and try to make it work and then try to make it better and then try to address so many different flavors. You're kind of the kaleidoscope of Manitou. I mean, we've got all kinds of people, all kinds of projects. It's a daunting task. So I think they've done a good job. Is it perfect? No, because they're going to come back and make some recommendations, I think, as to how they can fine tune the program. In the meantime, I want to acknowledge, Peggy, Dave, you've both done a lot. You have done a great deal for the community. You've been stalwarts. And I would hope you can maintain your interest in reapply next year. But like Mayor Pro Tem Fortune, I think the proposal, the slate that Match has put in front of us is pretty, it's not perfect probably, but it's pretty darn good. Other council comments? Julie.
I guess I'm in the minority. I am interested in pulling a few of the proposed funded projects off the list. I'm not going to go into the detail tonight. I'm obviously in the minority anyway. So I do believe that it's our job to decide how we're going to use these thousands and thousands of dollars of tax money to help Manitou. And I think if we simply say it's an all or nothing deal, we're going to approve the whole thing. That means we approve no matter whatever comes before us, because, I just don't think I think that's lazy, and I think it's not doing our job. I also think there's a difference between an illegal conflict of interest and the appearance or the propriety of appearance of propriety. And I mean by that we've got a lot of talented people, thank goodness, in the city. And I don't think it's appropriate for someone to be on the board to make a decision on who gets money if they're also applying for money. Choose. You either get off one board or you get off the other board. But because it just gets so many, I've had so much communication with people. It's exhausting this last couple of weeks, but because people are upset about, oh, this doesn't look right. This looks like favoritism, and this, and why is Neil getting money for his history center that he cares about? And meanwhile, these other things. So I think it's a simple solution just to eliminate that by just don't be on two boards. You choose one and that's it. And I think that might help us in the future. And maybe that'll be one of my suggestions if and when we get around to talking about the process someday.
Okay, thank you. I think you had some good comments there, Julie. And I guess I would ask the match board to take to heart some of the things she said. I think maybe if you look at how you do things in the future, that might be something for consideration. Do we have any further questions for Dave or Peggy? Guess not. Thank you.
I would just like to say one thing. You all want to talk about matching funds. I could tell you with the Historical Society last year, or the first year when we got 24,000 in electrical service into the castle, that was $70,000. This last year, we got 48,000. That project cost 78,000 and should have been somewhere around 125 to 150,000. When you think about the in-kind work that the Historical Society did themselves. So we do a lot of matching funds. So I just want that understood. We just don't take that money and just invest that. We invest a lot of our time, hard work, and money into the projects that we have completed. And we will continue to do that. It's all capital improvements. We used none of it to fund the castle. So I just wanted to say that.
Okay. Thanks, Peggy. I think that helps clarify things. Thank you. Well, I think Neil had some things he wanted to say. So Neil, if you'd come forward now.
Yes, so Neil Minch, 151 Clarksley Road. So I just want to respond to a couple of the comments that were sort of made. Then I'll invite the rest of the board who's here tonight to go over what the agenda item is, okay? So just to be very clear, and you can watch the video, at no time did I say anything to favor the Keithley Pines application. Now, in Peggy's email, it's suggested I could have done, and she's right, because I'm there, and I think that is to Councillor Wolf's point. But to be clear, that did not happen. Though and it may have been just a mix-up in wording there. Then I just want to go over the chronology, okay? So in December, I advised one of my Heritage Centre board members not to proceed with an application for a mural working with an artist on the west wall of the Heritage Centre, because at that time I didn't think it was eligible. Then in our January 5th meeting, which is one we're doing our tier 1 presentations. At the end of that, one of our board members said, hey, this application came in today. Is it eligible? And that was the Miramont architecture application by Dave. And I was a bit confused, as we all were, but I went with my gut, which was no. On January 9th, that's when I called Dave with my concerns. January 12th is when we had the top 12 tier 2 project requests for a Q&A session. And that was information gathering, okay? It was not any kind of rating or evaluation. The time ended when the questions ended, but I had sent an email saying I think each applicant had no more than 8 minutes, because we had 12 of these things, 12 times 8, hour and a half. And I think we may have had one that went over 8. And I appreciate Dave pushing this, because it pushed me to go find what the real answer was. So I went to our SOPs, and I couldn't see anything in the SOPs that said, hey, a tier 1 cannot benefit. So that got me thinking, did we mess up? So I sent an email to Dave on January 13th saying, it's not in our SOPs, therefore it's eligible. Then I recalled, was one of the first questions I asked this council in, I think, September 2020 or 21, whenever it was. And we wanted sort of guidance on, can a tier 1 benefit from a tier 2 grant? And Councillor Wolf actually gave me the wording, which I coincidentally had used in an email, which is, there's no reason that they can't, but you would take into account the funds that they are getting as a tier 1. So I sent Dave an email saying, hey, I found the real answer, which is you are absolutely eligible. And then later that day, I sent him another email saying, would you like to join the match board? Because in the conversation I had, he had some really good inputs. I appreciated them. Then on January 26th, that's when our rating process began. So we had until the 25th of January to make our initial inputs into the app. And then we carried on February 9th, February 23rd, but on January 26th, I argued in favor of funding. Okay. Now, does that sound like someone who has a grudge or an alternative objective? I don't think so. And I was the only person who pushed that. Then on February 23rd, once we had the final sales tax figures, we saw we had an additional $9,000 or $10,000 that we could allocate. I again argued in favor of granting partial funding for this application. No one else agreed. And again, I say, is that someone who has a grudge or some other objective here? So twice I went to bat because I saw the value in the application. I want to be very clear. When my integrity is being questioned, I'm not going to just take it. So I wanted to make these comments to you that I felt I was acting with all the integrity I could. Then there were a couple of other points which have escaped my mind now, but that's probably isn't important. And I totally understand the perception. I get that. And I got that in 2020. And I have been trying to get someone else to take over at board chair at a minimum. And Ralph will be board chair as of tomorrow. Okay, as I reported last week, though he has some issues, so I may have to continue until he's in a position that he can actually take it on. And I'm also open. We've got a lot of work to do this year. We are short a board member already. You know, Jason's an alternate, but he's been acting as a regular. We only have one alternate. So, you know, one thing I want to talk to the board about this and then perhaps bring it to you that perhaps going into the next round, which would be next November, is when applications begin opening up, that's when I perhaps withdraw. But I just think we need to make sure there's enough manpower on the board to get the work done, because there's a lot of work here. You know, this is unlike any other board in terms of the onus is on the board to do the work. I think I'll leave it at that. I thought you were raising your hand. So is it okay if I bring up the rest of the board now and we can talk about the applications?
I think so. Let me just quick see if council's pleasure. We can do a deep dive. Nancy had started to make a motion here before Neil came up. Council, do you want to go into more detail, or presumably we've studied this a fair amount. Do we want to go with motion? And that's not to preempt the match board, but we still have a fairly long night ahead of us.
Okay.
I have a question, Mayor.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, I can't think, is this a first and second reading situation, or is this just a one-time vote?
This is a one time, it's just an approval.
Okay, thank you.
Does someone on council want to make a motion, or do we want to continue on? Nancy?
I move to approve the match board's recommendations for the 2023 grant awards.
Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Okay. Neil, do you think your board would have an objection if we went ahead?
No.
Okay. Any further discussion, or if council would like to question any members of the match board, we could certainly do that, but in the interest of time,
I would just like to make a comment.
please.
Just for the record, I know I won't change anyone's mind, but I don't believe it's appropriate just to take a all or none approach to this. There are some specific things that are being funded here that I find objectionable or less appropriate than some of the other alternatives, to the point where it bothers me. In particular, that music event that they decided to fund was so horrible. And notwithstanding the comment of one of the people who was on the match board, who said, well, I was there for a little while and it seemed fine to me. It was horrible. It was, yay for sex, yay for being, effed up on drugs. Lots of swear words and the N word and all those typical rap things. I happen to listen to rap at home myself. But because I, grew up with teenage boys, but raised them, but I don't like to hear that screaming at me for, 6-8 hours or more in the park. Oh my God. And I think it's an embarrassment to Manitou. So I do have, and I also find it objectionable that we are giving money to that group so they can charge other people money to come into their event. I don't think we should be funding projects where people are making money. I mean, we're not supposed to be promoting capitalism. We're supposed to be promoting helping more and more people in the community enjoy themselves and do cool things, not just for the people who can afford it. So I have a few concerns like that, and that's the only reason why I'll be voting no.
Okay, thank you. And I guess since we're still in the deliberation phase, I think Councilor Wolf made some good points, Neil. I don't know if there's any influence Match might be able to have on the applicant to cultivate a little bit better behavior, but it seems it might be easy to ask.
Yeah, as it happens, I actually voted against that one, but for a different reason. Because it was a paid event, I felt now was into its third year, it should stand on its own. So I'm probably not the best person to ask. However, we can certainly, I think, add language to our feedback that incorporates a comment around we cannot have, if there is a repeat of last year's complaints, then don't expect an award next year. I mean, that's something I could do, but I
would hope that somebody, and maybe it needs to be the police, but somebody needs to show up with one of those, what is it called? One of those machines that measures the decibels, because it was so loud. It was so incredibly loud, hour after hour. It was like emotional torture. When I figure out what weekend they're coming, I'm going away that weekend because I can't handle it again.
I think in terms of the enforcement, that would probably fall more into the event and park, usage rather than the match board. As I said, I was arguing against it from a slightly different, perspective.
Okay, thank you. Nancy, did you have something you wanted to add? And then Judith?
No, I was just gonna, what Neil said is that Eric would need to go through the Parks Event Committee anyway, and they can help control that as well.
Okay, thank you. Judith.
Thank you, Neil, for coming up and speaking. One of the privileges of serving with the caliber of city council members that I get to sit here with is that they come up with some really great and important things that I don't always think about, especially when we've got a 605-page packet in front of us. And I think that
It's a big one this week.
right. Councilor Wolf really brings up some very important issues. I also do not feel good about the all or nothing character of it's a package deal. You either take all of it or nothing. And as I've been sitting here listening to the other council members, I didn't understand that, or didn't know that the Deer Summerfest, this is their third round of getting money.
Yes.
I had several complaints about this event also. I don't know how many other council members got complaints, but I do have trouble funding an event where the citizens of our town complained about it. I would be willing to approve the grant applications with the exception of this one applicant. And with the caveat that we come back to a work session sometime this year or Match comes back to talk about ways that we can improve the system based on what, we've talked about for this next round of grant funding. So that's my comment. Thank
Yeah,
you.
Judith, we have a motion to approve it as presented.
Then that's a friendly amendment.
Nancy, I think you made the motion.
I did, and I would prefer not to do that for a couple of reasons. First of all, I think that Eric, the Parks Event Committee, can influence it. Secondly, I've heard actually a lot of compliments for that event from people. So I think that instead of not funding it, we mitigate the concerns that folks have and amplify the good things that people found in it.
Okay, thank you. So the motion remains as it was to accept it as presented. Council, we have further discussion? Okay, if not, let's go ahead and vote.
We have a 4-1 vote in favor. The one dissenting vote is Counselor Wolf.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so the recommendations of the match board are approved as presented.
Okay, and I will add the comment at least into the feedback about the Summerfest one, as I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, and I think
you should go. Well, you voted against it. I think everyone who voted for it has to go and sit for at least 3 hours.
okay, thanks. We do have police and other agencies in the city government that hopefully can influence it and have a little more positive outcome this time. Okay. Neil and Match Board, thank you all for your work.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Judy, could you get Natalie? Would you mind? Okay, next item is resolution number 0923, a resolution adopting an updated universal fee schedule. And Becca Davis has been sitting there patiently waiting to speak to this.
Please note, this is my last agenda item for this evening. So on March 14th, a rate study for the Stormwater Enterprise Fund was presented to City Council. And after discussion, City Council directed staff to bring a $2 increase to the stormwater utility fee effective July 1st, 2023 to the next City Council meeting. And attached is the resolution that increases this fee on the universal fee schedule. And are there any questions?
Any questions from council? In that case, we can entertain a motion.
I move to approve.
Okay, motion by
I'll
Councilor
second.
Wolf, seconded by Councilor Chandler. Any further discussion? Let's vote.
Six to 0 in favor.
Great. Thank you very much, Becca.
Thank you.
and enjoy your evening. Okay. All right. And now. Okay. And now our last business item, I-5, it's first reading of ordinance number 0323, an ordinance repealing and reenacting chapter 9.46 of the Manitou Springs Municipal Code concerning sitting, lying, and street performing. And we have our public information officer, Alice Treefy, to present.
Good evening, Mayor Graham. Excuse me. Good evening, Mayor Graham, Manitou Springs City Council. My name is Alex Treffry. I am the Public Information Officer for the city. And I will be giving a presentation for the first reading of ordinance number 0323. Next slide, please. So just some history. I'm pretty sure we're all well aware, but for anyone watching who doesn't know, our sit-lie ordinance, which is what we're amending with this, or proposing to amend with this ordinance, was enacted in 2016. Shortly after that, there were verbal compromises made with street performers to allow them to perform in certain locations, because the sit-lie ordinance, as it reads, doesn't really allow for standard street performing. And what I mean by that is sitting on a stool with an instrument and laying out a container for donations in the downtown area. So that's essentially prohibited by this ordinance. So that's where those verbal compromises came in. An amendment was proposed to this ordinance by myself and Chief Otto with the Manitou Springs Police Department. That amendment was voted down on second reading 2-5 in June of 2022. And then City Council gave direction later on in that year to create a task force or work group rather of street performers, business owners, and police department personnel that can work together towards a common solution in amending this ordinance. And so that is where the street performing work group was formed. So next slide, please. So here's a Venn diagram that's not very easily readable on a PowerPoint, but it is there nonetheless. It's in the packet if someone wants to zoom in on it on their own will. But essentially, this is what was first, the information first gathered from this work group. So before the work group met together, I met with each with the street performers together, the business owners together, and the police department personnel together to see what their requirements and what their preferences were in an ordinance. And as you can see through the Venn diagram, just about the only shared preference was distance limits from specific areas, which is interesting because that's essentially what this proposed ordinance does for street performing. And we'll get into that more, but just a little more on the street performing work group and how they work together. Next slide, please. They met in November, January, and February. And as I said, they worked together to compromise towards a solution. I acted as more of an involved facilitator. And what I mean by that is a lot of the time with work groups, a facilitator will just make sure discussion stays on track. They'll create an agenda and they'll really make sure people are working together nicely. For this, I was a little more involved. I wasn't necessarily giving opinions or things like that, but I wanted to ensure that the group was working towards the direction that the city attorney and the city prosecutor gave myself on what an ordinance should look like, depending on what was contained within it, but also that the group was following the city requirements, which were that the ordinance must be clear, must be easy to understand, and it must be easy to enforce, because that's extremely important for this. But regardless, what is proposed today was supported by 5 of the 6 members of the group. The one person who did not support it was Commander Savine with the Manitou Springs Police Department. And to be quite honest, I think that working with a group like this, that's very different from like city council or a normal board or commission. I think that working with a work group that's super discussion based, it's important to at least try to work by consensus. Sometimes that's not always possible, which is what I believe this situation is, you know, consensus isn't 100% possible here. And so what I did was, is just because 5/6 of the members supported it, I believe that that one member still has valid experiences that influenced his decision-making. And so I told every member of the group that they have the ability to write a one-page memo that I'll include in the city council packet. Commander Savine was the only member of the group who has a memo, but he is in the audience if anyone would like to ask him questions after this presentation is over. In addition, we also have the two representatives for the street performers, Eli Blackshear, and then Michael Edmondson. And then also we have Officer Gary Johnson, who is also on the task force. But now let's get into what the actual proposed changes are. I just wanted to make sure we all understood the background. Next slide, please. So essentially the sit-lie ordinance is the same verbatim with these added additions. A culpable age for displaying items for sale, street performing, sitting down and kneeling. So that does not include lying down. That culpable age is 13. There are time limits for street performing. Excuse me. From Memorial Day to Labor Day, that would be 9 to 9. And from Labor Day to Memorial Day, that'd be 10 to 7. And then in this ordinance, there would be restricted locations for street performing. So that's 20 feet from a fire lane or crosswalk or a building entrance, unless a business owner or just the owner of that building in general gave written permission to perform within 20 feet of their entrance. So that could allow for a business to hire a street performer to come out and play music during one of their events, something like that. I know at previous meetings, that was a concern that was brought up. So I'm glad the group was able to address that. In addition, I don't think it matters too much except for maybe in the future, but 15 feet from an ATM, whoever decide to have one of those outside. And then 40 feet from outdoor dining, another street performer, or a sanctioned concert. It's worth noting that groups of performers may perform together if the sidewalk is passable. And also a performer cannot perform on a public bench or with an amplification device per this ordinance. Next slide, please. In terms of violations, it is a progressive structure with the first offense being $50, second offense being $100, the third offense being $250, and subsequent offenses being $499. And so I just wanted to mention for transparency's sake that there was a minor change that we wanted to implement on second reading. We don't need to implement it now under section 946040G. And it is, I don't have the verbatim change right now. I work with Jeff Parker. None of the intent will change, but there is just a little bit of a wording issue that we will change, but the intent is still the same with the ordinance, but I didn't want anyone to be surprised if the wording of G changes when we bring it for second reading, if it passes on first. With that, I will take questions. And if you have any questions for the street performing work group, we have 4 members here. Unfortunately, no business owners were able to make it.
Julie.
This may sound a little bizarre, but if we're going to bother to say that you can't stand on a bench to perform, should we also say you can't stand on the tables? Like we have those tables, you know, in the park, the picnic tables. And I think at one point somebody was once arrested for standing or sitting on the wall, you know, like the wall right outside the mate. So is it legal to play music if you're standing on a table or a wall, the way the ordinance is currently written?
I would say we're with,
Maybe
I
we
don't
should,
know
well, you're
about
not the
other
attorney.
laws.
Let me ask Jeff.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No, you're
Can, Jeff, do we have to add that? It just seems like if you're gonna bother to say no chairs, are you gonna say no tables and no walls, or
Yeah.
where do you stop?
But
you
right
know?
now, it says at no time may a street performer perform on a public bench. So I don't see anything about tables or anything like that. So we could basically add that, clarify it.
And I don't know if council wants it, but at one time you also could not stand on the retaining wall or on the, what are they called? You know, the little walls that we have around the sidewalk. Well, you can't be on near a crosswalk anyway, but just the different retaining walls that you have, you know. If you don't want people playing on those, we should probably add walls, retaining walls.
We could definitely add that. That's definitely not an issue. It's hard to kind of capture all the different places they could be standing, but I think that's fine.
Could I add something I completely forgot to mention that I think kind of plays
Yeah,
into that?
yeah,
I apologize. Yes, I apologize for not mentioning this. It is in the memo, but I want to verbally say it as well. The street performing work group unanimously agreed that at the end of this summer season, if city council does implement this proposed change, that we would come together at the end of summer, evaluate it, see if there were problems, such as people perhaps standing where in areas they shouldn't, that maybe we want to regulate as an example. But to see if there are problems, and if we do find problems, to bring that more proposed changes back to council in the winter season. So coming together and evaluating what was implemented was something that the group decided to do. So I didn't want to forget to say that, so.
May I make one more comment and then
Yeah,
I'll
go ahead,
stop?
Julia.
I just wanted to mention that because I really did take to heart the memo from the police officer who talked about how impossible it was to deal with the problems that led to the ordinance that we're now being asked to change. I would hope that the police department would notify us if they see persistent difficulties even before the end of the summer, if we need to change this ordinance, because, you know, this is like an experiment. So I guess that's more of a message to the police department, but if there are problems, I hope they let a city council know so that we can reconsider.
Thank you. Council, what I guess I'd recommend is we have more questions for Alex. Let's go ahead and do that. And then I think I'd like to hear from Commander Savine if council has any objections. John?
Yeah, Alex, could you respond? We had in earlier comments with regard to this from 115 Canyon Avenue, which I think you're probably familiar with that Stratton Spring property. What are your thoughts on the concerns of that residential owner with regard to the proposed ordinance?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'll be very transparent about it. I was here I showed up for the latter half of his public comment, but I heard some things that I think were referring to the previous proposed amendment. And so I took him aside and spoke to him because I didn't think he'd wait till whatever 9 p.m. to hear, you know, what the actual proposed ordinance was. So I did speak to him and clarified some points to him. I don't want to speak on his behalf on how he feels, but I will say that the 20-foot distance from a building entrance restricted area, like regulation that we're putting in place, is not only for businesses. So that does include residential areas. I know that building, if I recall, that door is by the wall for that spring. So I've never went there with a tape measure to see what areas it would regulate, things like that. But the distance requirement is the same for a residence as it is a business. It's just a building entrance.
Thank you. Does that give you a sufficient answer, John? Okay, great. Okay, do we have any additional questions for Alex at this time? I think we can bring him back if we want. Okay, Judith.
Just a comment. I really applaud you and your group. I think it's wonderful that members of the police force and buskers and business owners got together. And I just wanted to say that we don't always tell you, but we made that we gave that direction and you fulfilled that. And I just wanted to let you know that I really appreciate the group that came together and presented this. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. If council doesn't have any objections, then I'd ask that Commander Savine come forward and we give him an opportunity to give us his thoughts. Thanks, Alex. Commander, just your name and rank would be sufficient.
Commander Corey Sveen.
Thank you. Commander, of course, you'd included a letter, kind of a dissenting opinion in a sense that was in council's packet. I think there's some kind of a generalized description of the situation. If you could kind of give council some perspective from your experience as a law enforcement officer, what you might feel the weaknesses of this are. It's hard to come up with something that's a perfect solution, but we would like to give the opportunity to share your thoughts.
I agree. And we all talked about this. And I guess my reservations are, I was here before the sit-lie ordinance went into place. So I remember what we dealt with downtown at that time. It was a lot of drugs.
The microphone just a little closer there.
Yeah, it was a lot of drugs, alcohol, fighting, arguing with us and so on. So going back to the sit-lie ordinance and taking away from that now, because the sit-lie ordinance helped us alleviate some of those problems, most of those problems. And taken away from that now just is scary to me because I don't want to see us going back to what we went through before. And I want the officers to have to spend a majority of their time downtown trying to take care of these problems again, like we did prior.
Okay, thank you. Julie.
Sir, was it mostly the musicians who were doing drugs and fighting with the officers?
I can't say it was mostly them. There's an influx of all kinds of people down there, but they were part of that, yes.
The reason I ask is I did notice, and I appreciated the fact that you can't be sitting and lying and doing any of this stuff unless you're playing an instrument or you're singing.
Correct.
So I didn't know if that would cut down on the difficulties, but clearly I would think if this does pass tonight, if you find that the officers, we don't have that many of you, are having to spend all this time downtown on Friday and Saturday nights or whatever, whenever the troubles tend to start, and it takes you away from your other business, you need to make sure that we're aware of it so that we can.
And we're coming up on the busy season, as we all know. And I know in past years, we had a downtown detail. We had money set aside for that. And at this point, we don't have that. So in order to have those extra officers down there, we're taking them off the road, away from other calls and services that are required in the city. So yeah, I'm reserved about, putting my stamp of approval on this when I go back to what we incurred before.
Thank you. Alex?
Councillor Wolf, I just wanted to clarify something regarding what street performing is considered. So we all do when we picture street performing, just because it's the most common form we think of playing a musical instrument or singing. But per this ordinance, street performing is more broad than that, and it's defined. I won't read the whole definition, but it's engaging in any form of performing art, including but not limited to posing, acting, dancing, miming, whether in costume or not, or playing any instrument, things like that. So I want to be transparent so you're aware that it's not just playing an instrument.
Thank you. That's really important. That's so, Jeff, geez. So I can go down there and make a ruckus and I'll say, this is art. I'm performing, I'm dancing, and I'm allowed to do that, right?
Yeah, I think there's going to be situations where it's going to be very obvious that somebody's not street performing. And there's going to be ones where it's very difficult to determine whether that's what's going on or not, or they could make certain excuses, I guess. Yeah, these are difficult ordinances to draft for. Yeah, so I guess the question is, do you want to limit it to certain types of street performance? Like only music is allowed with an instrument. I mean, you could probably do that. As long as you aren't basically addressing the content of what they're singing, because you basically need to deal with some free speech issues. And so at this point, there's going to be issues where it's going to be difficult to prosecute or to ticket somebody for it. But there's going to be situations where it's going to be obvious that they're not. And those will be the ones that you can enforce. Like any law, some laws are really clear. Some laws have a spectrum where you're going to have to use some judgment on, but you're definitely right. There's going to be issues.
Yeah, because the judge wasn't there and no one's going to have a video. Anyway, that's really, I appreciate that you pointed that out to me, Alex, because that was an oversight on my part. I think one way that we might be able to address or minimize the concerns that this officer is raising with us is if we eliminate the dancing. We don't need dancing on a sidewalk on a crowded day. Okay, with people trying to shop and everything. So that might be one way to try to make the arrests easier, because I can imagine almost anyone can say, well, I was dancing. And if I were the judge, I'd be like, well, yeah, how can you? No one's, if you think it was dancing, it was dancing. Dancing is in the eye of the beholder or the person who's doing it. I don't know. That does sound like kind of a squishy area to me.
Well, there's a definition of street performance in here, and it includes a lot of things. So right now, the way it reads is it's basically a street performer is somebody who engages in any form of performing art, including but not limited to posing, acting, dancing, or miming, whether in costume or not, the playing of any musical instrument, and singing or vocalizing with or without accompaniment. So, I mean, there's a lot of performance type activities that could be included in there.
Mr. Shada and then Natalie.
So we have an existing ordinance. Okay. It seems like to me the risk in this, and I was just wondering what your feedback is, that if this really went off the rails, which I don't think it will, but let's say it did. Functionally, it really only just takes us 3 weeks to go back to what we have now. So that's the way I'm kind of looking at it, is that if we go through with this and it, just like I said, goes off the rails, I think that council could move pretty quickly for a first and second reading and substitute the language we have right now, which is pretty restrictive. So that's kind of the way I'm looking at it, is I'm kind of willing to kind of give this a chance, you know what I mean? And I guess I'm kind of willing to kind of, put up with maybe 3 weeks of chaos.
And Alex had mentioned that.
But I don't think that's going to happen anyway.
He mentioned that prior. And the problem with that is when you change an ordinance, you have to educate everybody, in that area about the ordinance. So if we take these 3 weeks, we try to educate, the people that are going to be down there performing. Then if it doesn't work out, we have to go back and we have to educate them over again. It just causes confusion, right? And that's something I want to be avoided too. And a couple more of my issues were the distances, the 20 feet rule from a business. With the sit lie ordinance and the areas that are mentioned in there, I'm not sure where these performers are going to perform. That isn't in a right of way, a walkway, a curb, whatnot. So they're going to have to perform in these areas that are already in the sit lie ordinance. So I'm not sure where this will be done.
You mean it's unclear to you in terms of with all these little measurements that are kind of outlined in here, distances from.
Well, that too. I mean, I can't have my officers going down there with tape measures and rulers and everything and saying, hey, are you 20 feet from this business? Are you 40 feet apart? I can see an issue with that as well.
What, don't you think it'll largely be sort of like complaint related? I mean, I can't imagine the officers wandering around downtown, like you said, with a tape measure, doing all these measures just to see. Wouldn't you think it's mainly a complaint level thing? In other words, there's a citizen complaint about it. Somebody's too close to a business door or residential door or something.
It could be, and it could come from the citizen, the visitor, businesses. I mean, we
Right.
get a lot of our complaints from the businesses prior. I see them having a lot of issues with, if these performers are too close to their business and without time limits on there either. This performer could be 20 feet from their front door. And, we've had it before where they're playing the accordion or the bagpipes. We had a guy playing the bagpipes down there one day. Of course, the business owners were calling because he was pretty loud. And that took some time, some arguments, little use of force to get that person out of there. And again, that's the kind of things I'm trying to avoid.
Right. Natalie?
I'm pretty comfortable with where John Shada was headed with that idea of being overly restrictive in advance of there being a problem. And I have confidence in the busking community that we were sort of introduced to, several months ago, that we've worked together on this and you've all worked together on this, and there's a lot to lose. And so I have a feeling that the community itself will help to enforce the rules so that we stick with what we currently are proposing and don't then take away privileges and opportunities moving forward. So I just wanted to point that out. I'm excited to also include the language that's a little more creative to see again if there are any problems with that before we sort of take that away. So.
Thank you. Yes, Commander, the kind of problems you described, I think drugs, alcohol, fighting, so forth. Yeah, I guess my sense of this is that it's the street performers are attracting a crowd, and then the crowd brings bad behavior. So it seems to me that we have rules and regulations, of course, against the drugs and the alcohol. And so in a sense, there's two separate issues here, but they blend and it causes a problem. So for the officer on the street, he's got one problem. I get that. So if somebody's drunk and disorderly, you've got I think a course of action you can take him in. I guess really in my mind the problem here is that it creates it's kind of an attractive hazard. It creates a nuisance. Can you speak to that?
It is, and it's going to attract, at this point, I don't know how many different people down there. I have no idea how it'll work out. I just can go by past experience in the history of it. Anything can happen, any crowd can get down there. And I know a lot of you have an experience, but when you get into an argument with people downtown, or you try to remove them from the situation, other people get involved. And it makes it 10 times worse for us to try to handle the situation and get it under control. So again, that's part of my hesitation.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah. John?
We went through this last year and then we decided not to do it, right? So how do you think last summer went, where just how that rolled? I want to go into, how we tried an ordinance, right? And then we kind of abandoned it and whatnot. But how do you think last summer went from the standpoint of just all this behavior, in your opinion? Your concerns.
My concerns for last summer?
Yeah.
The problem that we had with the city lie ordinance is the past chief gave direction to let the buskers busk along the curb of the downtown area, right? Of course, that isn't in the ordinance, but that was a directive that we were given in the PD. So that kind of stuck. But again, it's not in the ordinance. So yeah, it wasn't as bad as before there was no sit-lie ordinance, but we still have our problems. I can tell you a time that myself, the chief, and one of our civilians were downtown. And I went calmly up to somebody that was busking downtown and asked them if they could move. I was polite about it. He decided that he wanted to argue and so on. So we got it under control and he moved on his way. Probably about 10 minutes later, we were walking back from lunch and that same person was talking to one of his friends down there. And he was telling the story that, you know, we pulled a gun on him, we kicked over his can, and we're going to prone him out on the ground and cuff him up, which none of that happened. It didn't. But that's the kind of things we deal with, you know. If we could get to a point where, I'm not totally against this at all, don't get me wrong. If we could get to a point where we could have designated areas that everybody agreed on that can be controlled, we wouldn't have as much of a problem down there with time limits as well. Those are my thoughts. And I know some people didn't agree with me on that, but I think that would make it a lot more controllable.
Thank you.
So
Let's see,
it's.
John,
oh,
let's
sorry.
Judith, and then we'll get back to you. And then we'll see Judith, Denise, John, and then we'll try again. We'll see. Okay, Judith.
So, when council gives direction, and you come back because you delivered on that direction, and I feel you have. So staff was directed to have buskers, street performers, business members of the business community and police come together, and you did that. You pulled it off. And with the participants, we did have 5 of the 6 members of this committee bring us a product that I'm willing to try. I really do very much respect the input of the police department. Don't get me wrong, you're our frontline officers that respond to these problems. But I have to agree with Councilor Johnson in that I'd like to give this a whirl, and I really don't want to limit the types of performers. I think if I've learned anything on council, it's that everything's a pilot study, and we have to, at some point say, well, you did what we asked. You delivered a product. I think that at this point, I feel comfortable with giving it a try for this summer. And if we get problems, you'll notify us immediately and we can take a look at it and make any necessary changes. But I was impressed with how you pulled it off and came back with a product that I think that is worth trying. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe Denise, you're next.
Yeah, I just want to remind council, our current ordinance that you have on the books, there are no buskers. That's how it reads. So that's why we brought this back, because right now the police are not enforcing the law. So I wanted to remind that our current ordinance says no buskers at all. And that's how we got to where we are.
Great. Thank you. John, I believe you were next.
Well, and that's why I was asking, given that last summer, functionally, we weren't just enforcing anything, right? And so.
Well, that's not true. We were
Okay, I'm sorry.
enforcing
Yeah,
some of it.
help me. How much enforcing did we do? And from your perspective.
I don't have the numbers in front
You
of me.
haven't got just like 6, 10, 20 every day?
Probably a few times a week.
Few times
I
a
would
week?
say, yeah.
Okay, all right. Then I was curious about your comment about maybe the time limit might help. What would you suggest for that if we did put something like that in there?
I think we had discussed it in our work group.
So time limits were discussed extensively. The advice from the city prosecutor was that if we are to have time limits, there needs to be a paper trail that could be talked about in court, which is where we had a lot of pushback. I'm sure if you'd like, the pushback came from, well, various number of groups, but mainly the street performers, representatives. They're here if they'd like to talk about that, but just so you're aware, it was a requirement that if we were to have time limits, there must be some way of having a paper trail, whether that's a permit, registration, something along that aspect, because that's what the city prosecutor told us.
Well, I beg to differ with that, because I'll tell you what, I think a way that could be handled is this. I think largely these complaints happen because there's a complaint sent into dispatch, correct? And that's the start. Okay, and so if we said you can entertain for 2 hours, there's your paper trail there where the start of it is there. Our officers show up, they document everything when they come on each one of these calls. So there's your starting time. Okay. And so the reason why I'm asking is that I think that living in a real small community like this, it's everybody's somewhat opinion as to kind of what's art and what's annoying. Okay. And I think we kind of learn to kind of live with each other by giving a little bit of latitude, but when it kind of goes on for 6 hours or 5 hours or an extended period of time, then, maybe your home or your business becomes really sort of untenable. So that's why I was asking about something that's a time limit that would be kind of reasonable, for entertainment purposes. Because I can remember a situation that happened down in the 700 block, okay, in which went on all day. And those residents down there were just beside themselves. They were about ready to lose their minds in terms of with the noise. So that's why I was asking about the time. What would be reasonable? Thank you.
Thank you. Other council questions, comments? Okay. Would anyone in council want to hear from other people who are on this work group, the buskers or Officer Johnson's here? Okay. Who do you want to hear from first, next? Okay, I guess since we're on a police roll, maybe Officer Johnson could be next. Gary, if you have thoughts and perspectives, this would be a good time for you to share them. If you'll just give us your name and rank, that'd be fine.
How you doing? I'm Officer Johnson with Matthews Spring PD. I'm just a patrol officer.
Okay.
Just a patrol officer. Yeah.
That's fine.
I came into this work group. I wanted to stay pretty open.
Gary, can you get the microphone a little closer? to
A
your
little
mouth there?
closer. Okay. Is that better? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, it sounds good.
So I wanted to start it off with being neutral to the project. I'm born and raised here on the west side. I wanted to work in Matthews, the only police department I applied to when I got the job. Been here since 2014. Matthews is a unique environment, from the citizens to the people who come to visit our downtown area. Part of that is the uniqueness, the art and performers that people come down to Manitou just to spend the day to share whatever it is they have for themselves to share with everybody else. Second half of that is our business owners downtown. I wanted to create an opportunity to support those businesses, not have somebody give them an opportunity to control who's performing in front of them, how they're doing that, because it does affect their business. With the time limit, my only hesitation with the time limit on there is there's calls for service that should be placed in our downtown area. Nobody calls because they assume somebody else calls. And if people are sitting in their business watching the clock saying it's been 2 hours, the police should be coming along any minute to tell this person they need to move on. Well, there's days in the summer where it's our busy time of the year and I'm busy everywhere else in the city. I barely get to come through the downtown area. And then we're going to start generating complaints because the police department's not coming down here and having buskers move every 2 hours. I'd like that opportunity for the business owners to be able to take action on that, tell somebody, hey, you're too close to my building, can you move on? And then on top of that, most of the buskers in town, the locals, they kind of do a good job of not regulating, but sharing that knowledge of, hey, this isn't a good spot, here's a good spot. So that's just all I have. I just wanted to be able to come together with the group and help try to find the most reasonable solution to the task at hand.
Nicely stated. Council, other questions for Officer Johnson? I guess not. Sorry. Oh, Nancy, please.
And this isn't for you. It's just that I think we're at, beyond a 90% solution on this. We're we'll probably never have above a 90% solution on this. We went into this trying to ensure that busking was in fact legal. And this does that in a way that most of the work group came together and were able to support. So, and I also very much appreciated that they're going to come back together at the end of the summer to reassess it. And I think that the suggestion that if the police have concerns about it, then they come back before the end of the summer and let us know. But I think a 90% solution, given where we started, is pretty darn good. So thanks to the work group for getting us there.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Gary.
To go with the side problems that come with busking in the downtown area, we do have city ordinances to help us regulate those issues, from disorderly conduct, harassment. We even have an ordinance against scavenging through trash cans in the downtown area. So we have multiple tools at our hands to help regulate the downtown area. I just wanted to add that part to that.
Okay, Julie?
Does the police department have something to measure how loud a decibel measurer
So,
machine?
For a decimal reader,
Yeah.
the police department itself, we do not have any of those. I think the only one that we have in the city currently is with the community services with Cindy Shorts.
What's community services?
Neighborhood services, sorry. Code enforcement.
Oh, code enforcement.
Yes.
Okay, so they do have that in code enforcement. So if there's a noise problem, they can bring the machine down and take a measurement. Is it like something you can throw in the back seat of your car and bring it somewhere?
It's about the size of a microphone.
We have it in neighborhood services and parks and rec, and she keeps it at her desk. So on the weekends, the police could come and grab it if they needed it.
Oh, thank you.
It seems like I read someplace where you could get a decibel meter app for your phone. I don't know how accurate it is in terms of law enforcement, but it may tell you that something's just too loud, and that's all you need to know. Anyway, quick comment there. That would be a cheap way to go if it works. Do we have any more comments or questions for Officer Johnson? I guess not. Thanks, Gary. Okay. Well, I think now would be an appropriate time to ask the buskers if they would like to make any comments or answer questions. And we'll need your names and addresses, gentlemen.
Michael Edmiston, 111 Elk Path.
Eli Blacksher, 115 Pony Avenue.
Okay, thank you. So council, do we have questions for these gentlemen? Well, I guess I do. And I think when we were entertaining this, this ordinance or we're looking for solution last year, it seemed to me that there was some hope that the performers themselves would sort of have a self-policing influence. I realize that doesn't work all the time, but that, if we have a culture like that, that helps the police, I think, and helps the community. Can you guys speak to that?
We really don't want to mess this up overall with just other people not knowing the rules or not knowing the distances and stuff like that. It was kind of our intent on this proposed ordinance to minimize the effort that any police officers have to take in enforcing and checking permits and responding to time limits and stuff like that. So this, in our opinion, was kind of the most feasible, as much as less man hours involved in kind of just knowing where you're allowed to play at instead of having to know how long you're allowed to play there and whatnot.
I would speak to a big thing that came up with the generality of how we put this together was that the kind of way that, well, I think when we went in there, we said that we would rather know where we can't play or where we can play rather than where we can't, right? And the way that this is structured, I feel like it starts to create something like in a cultural sense too, that will be really easy for people to grasp along with. And it keeps a sense of, artistic freedom there for people performing, but it also has very defined parameters that I feel like town can grow with. So I think that was a big part of why we pushed for some of the things that we did as well.
Okay, council, do you have questions or comments? I guess not. Thank you, gentlemen. Alex, you got any follow-on thoughts?
Yeah, I know it's getting late, so just very briefly, I just wanted to mention that this group was great to work with. And as you can notice, a lot of differing opinions came up here, and a lot of differing viewpoints caused by experiences were portrayed up here to council tonight. And they never spoke ill of each other or each other's viewpoints. They were all very respectful. So it was a great group to work with. And even though two of them couldn't make it, I do greatly appreciate all that they did, because spending a few hours in a room with each other to write a law essentially is not easy. And I really appreciate the time that they put forward to making their city better. So thank you.
Thank you. Council, further discussion?
I make a motion?
Okay, Natalie and
Oh,
then
sorry.
Denise. No, that's okay, Natalie.
We'll just make the meeting.
I
better.
just wanted to say, and a shout out to Alex for leading this group. It is not always easy to bring a diverse group together, but he managed it very well and encouraged everybody's participation and thoughts. So a shout out to Alex.
Great, thank you, Alex. Natalie,
I move to approve ordinance number 0323, an ordinance repealing and reenacting chapter 9.46 of the Manitou Springs Municipal Code concerning sitting, lying, and street performing on first reading.
we have a motion,
Second.
seconded by Mayor Pro Tem. Open to discussion here. Judith?
Just a friendly amendment. We discussed our city attorney expanding the areas where like the wall, the planters and so the tables. So I would just
I'd like, if we could we amend it at second reading instead of
Sure.
amending on the fly?
I just didn't want us to forget that that was. gonna
No, I
come
do
in.
appreciate
Okay.
that. So does that,
Yeah,
let's see. So I'm willing to amend with the idea that we come forward for second reading.
We can bring it back with that proposed revision for you to consider on second reading.
Okay, and Mr. Parker, then can the existing motion stand?
That's right. Yep.
Okay, great. That was my
Mayor,
thought.
there was also some mention that Alex gave about some wording changes that were for a certain section. And so I don't know if we want to elaborate on that so that we can get that in the works as well.
So
Yeah,
my thought would be we just make that change as well. We'll just show it to you with those proposed revisions, because you can make those changes on your second reading.
Right, okay, if that sounds reasonable.
Right now, the approved version will be this version, with the understanding we'll bring you back options to look at with those
Okay.
changes.
So there'll be some tweaks following, okay. Great. Let's see, other comments or deliberation from council? Okay, I guess, I think this is a step forward. I think there's been a tremendous amount of work that's gone into this. If we were to postpone it or send it back to the drawing board, I don't think we'd have it in time for this summer. So I think it's a good effort. Let's get it out. Let's test it. At the same time, let's also be vigilant, as was mentioned. If the police report problems, then I think we want to address it sooner rather than later. But I have hope that we'll all learn to get along and have something that works for the community. Anything else? If not, let's vote.
6-0 in favor.
Great, thanks. And thanks to everybody who worked on this. Okay, let's stay tuned and make this work. Okay, let's see. I think we can go to page 2 now of our agenda. Actually, we're down to council correspondence. Let's see, we were talking about, okay, next week, we actually don't have anything pending. That would be a work session normally. Staff and some others of us are working on things, trying to get them ready for the following week. But if there's no objection, we won't meet next week. And then for the April 4th meeting, we have several executive sessions. There's a proposal, I think you all got an email from Denise suggesting we start at, I believe it was 3:30 on April. Denise, refresh my memory.
Yeah, they haven't received the email, but you were going to ask them tonight if they
Okay, I'm
could do
sorry.
that.
Okay, yeah. And I'm sorry, because some of my emails have been coming in late, I get them like the next day. So what we were thinking of, and Denise and I, we have several executive session items to deal with on April 4th. We were thinking maybe if we could start early, like at 3:30, do the executive sessions and break, and we'll have dinner brought in, and then we'll get on with the regular business, hopefully at 6 o'clock. So Mr. Parker's available. Wanted to kind of go around the room and see if you'd all be available. If you need to check schedules, we could maybe push it out a day.
I can make it.
You can, okay. Nancy? Yeah, the 4th, April 4th. Okay, she can make it. John? You're good. Okay, Natalie? Julie?
I have to check. I have something that day and I can't remember. It's either a trial in the morning or a trial in the afternoon and I forget. So
Okay.
I'll just say yes and then I'll let you know tomorrow if
Okay.
I'm
yeah,
incorrect.
If you would, okay. So sorry for the surprise, but it's springtime. We're trying to get ready for the summer season and there's a bunch of stuff. Tonight is kind of proof of that. But we made up for it tonight and we'll be able to take next week off. I think that's all I've got. Anybody else got stuff for council correspondence?
Manny Awards, Manny
Natalie.
Awards are on Thursday.
Oh, Manny Awards on Thursday. Okay.
And I think Alex is up for Manny. So
True. Yeah. Mhm. And I think Hannah from planning and Chief Auto are also up. Is there someone else on staff that I missed? Okay. Megan. Okay. So we have place your bets. Place right. Okay. Okay. Anything else?
I have.
Natalie? Okay. Let's go,
I got-
Julie.
Oh, sorry. I thought you called on me.
Oh, that's okay. Sorry.
I got a call from a man who said that he enjoyed spending time watching all the kids and their families playing and hanging out and fishing at the pond right by the pool. And he complimented, oh, it's so great, Manitou does that, da, 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 da. And then it ended with, you really need more water in the pond and you really need more fish to be stocked in the pond. But it's a great idea, but it's lacking enough water and enough fish. So I said I would bring that up and see if maybe someone in the city staff could look into that. And then the other thing is my own shtick is Park Avenue along, Soda Springs Park there. I know, Roy, you warned me and you were right that the fix that the city has for all these huge holes it lasts for anywhere from, it seems like 1 to 4 days. But we have summer coming up upon us. That is such a heavily used road. That is the only way for everyone in that neighborhood to get out of town, is that one tiny little street, and it's in such horrible condition. It's an embarrassment. I would not want to invite anyone to come visit me and spend time at Manitou and drive one of the most main streets that's used. It looks like some, third world country or some like dumpy city or some, And so I am just beside myself that that road looks so horrible. And I know that the city has this thing, oh, we don't want to spend our own money fixing roads. We just want to wait till we get that RPPTA money. But I just don't think it's right. I think it looks horrible. And it's also dangerous. If we get sued, we're going to lose, because anyone on a bike hitting one of those huge potholes, oh my gosh, it's treacherous. And I find it unacceptable. And I'm sure I'll be told, oh, there's nothing we can do. But it's not okay.
Okay, well, staff, if you could take that under advisement. So. Anything else from council? Judith?
Yeah, there is a CML conference on Wednesday, the 29th. It starts at noon. I don't know how long it goes. It is a Zoom meeting. I bring this up, I registered for it today. It's going to be the executive director of CML is going to do a town hall on the 2023 land use legislation coming up. And that proposed legislation is a big red flag for me because there's talk about presenting legislation that will curb municipal zoning and land use authorities with the interest of increasing housing in general, and in particular affordable housing. And so I will attend that. I've got some real concerns about where that proposed legislation might go. So just wanted to give you an heads up if you wanted to attend that. It's free and it's on Zoom. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Anything else from council? Yes, not. Let's go to the city manager's report, city administrator's report.
Yes, so I'll respond to the paving. So we actually are putting out for bid right now to do roads. And so again, we can't do any paving until we get into about the end of April, May phase, because you have to have warm weather. And asphalt businesses are not open at this time. So we do have many on the list, including Park, to be taken care of. So that'll be done in April, May timeframe, depending on weather. So, and we also talking to some experts in paving, we're able to extend some of the streets that we'll be doing this summer compared to our initial list. So we have quite a few that we'll be doing on top of what, yeah. So number two is that the pond is dependent on the flows of the creek. So if the creek's running low, the pond drops. And so we don't fill it. It's naturally filled by the creek itself. We will check the flows and make sure that the pipe is working, and but normally it does drop this time of year. Not a lot we can do. Stocking is done by the Division of Wildlife. We can check on the last time they stocked it, but they were stocking it at one point, and I'm not sure they are today, but we'll look at that as well. So thank you.
Thank you. Denise?
Yeah, I just wanted to remind that we are home rule. So even if that legislation gets passed, we have the authority to not accept it due to being home ruled. So that does help us as legislation is being passed at the state level.
Okay, if there's nothing else, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councilor Chandler. Seconded by,
Second.
okay, Councilor Johnson. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Thank you. Okay, thanks, everybody.